Would what do you mean? Like what do you mean? Hi, hello, welcome to or welcome back to my channel. Now, not to bring the mood down here, but full transparency, my intention was to have a series leading up, but unfortunately that timing didn't work out due to what ultimately led up to losing my emotional support pupper of 11 years, Legend, who is a Great Dane, and basically my soulmate in pup form. Then, in the same week, I also lost my grandfather and found out that my last living grandparent is also now being placed on hospice. So, things have been rough, but I could really use a distraction, and I can't really think of a better way than diving into my first dedicated Taylor Swift video. That said, due to the timing and the proximity to the release, I'm having to kind of consolidate everything into one single video, which is going to be a feat, and unfortunately means that I had to cut down a lot of things. I have a lot of notes, and I'm probably going to look at them a lot more than I wish I was, but don't exactly have the best ability to self-edit, and I will talk for 7 hours. And I mean that so serious. I wish I was kidding. This is also my first talking head type video. So, I mean, don't get me wrong. I talk a lot in my reaction videos, but because I'm all about the lyrics. But this is technically my first talking head video. So, bear with me. But I do have a lot to say and I'm excited about it. And a little bit more about my credentials. And then we'll hop into it. I've been a Swiftie since 2006 when Debut came out. I think I was 11 when that came out, so I've been here for a while. I'm also the trifecta, if you will, of neurodivergent, odd ADHD with dyslexia, and Taylor has been one of my few special interests that has stayed consistent for that long. And she's created a safe space for me to kind of let my pattern recognition run wild and dive into the, kind of multiverse that she's created for us to explore together. So excited to be diving into a new era and discussing everything, especially because I didn't have a channel previously, and there has been so many times that I've been like, dang it, if I would have just had a channel. So, and I can't think of a better one to kick this off with than one with a Showgirl theme, because I am just, quite frankly, freaking out. So, while we could talk about Easter eggs for the next 3 hours, I'm going to try to hit high points here and start with some Easter eggs that I want to talk about that I think will help frame things as we go forward, and just some of the things we've learned throughout this rollout. It's about, when I'm filming this, we've got less than a week till The Life of Showgirl comes out. So, and I'm also going to be talking about my predictions, just the album in general, as well as each individual tracks. Some tracks I have a lot more to say about than others. This album just happens to have a lot of things that I feel very passionately about. These are just shots in the dark. Sometimes things can be, when you are looking for something, you will find things. That's not meant to say that she doesn't do a lot of things intentionally, because she does. But I more want to point that out in the sense of, I'm not saying that all of these things were 100% planned. Sometimes I think that there are things that just happen. I also think Taylor has the ability to plant a lot of things, so she has a lot of threads to pull on based on what happens, whether that be big things, little things, anything like that. I think she creates a lot of pathways for herself. If you've planted things along the way that are easy threads to pull from, it makes it to where you can make those connections and you can set your next steps up to link back to those. Maybe the things I'm going to talk about are complete shots in the dark. Maybe they're not. Who knows? And that's okay. It's still such a fun part of being a part of the Taylor Swift fandom, but I think acknowledging that maybe some of these things are set up in that way is going to be important for some of the theories that I have. Last disclaimer, please, please, please. I know we're only a week out, and by the time you guys see this, we're only a couple days out, but I do plan on filming a reaction, so please no spoilers. I've been very, very lucky to not have spoilers, at least to my knowledge, so please keep it that way in the comments. Album covers, first of all, sickening, stunning. There are not enough adjectives to properly describe how gagged I have been at all of the visuals. Oh my God. If you would have told me that I would be getting Chicago burlesque, like these are some of my favorites. Just that whole aesthetic. I have seen burlesque so many times, it's not even funny. And I've also been obsessed with people who I would consider to be showgirls of the past. And I'm also a big old Hollywood fan. So no matter which way you cut it, having the aesthetic that this album has been giving me life. Now, I do want to talk about some of the variants. Obviously connected to the poems, yes, but I think some of them also might be lyrics that might be connected with the like special edition CDs. We have more hints of where maybe some of the verbiage within the descriptions might possibly link to those specific songs. I have made some of my predictions based on that as an assumption. The Shiny Bug edition, it's wintergreen and onyx marbled vinyl is one of them. No clue where that's gonna go at all. Then the next one is violet shimmer marbled, and it's black and gold marbling and gold shimmer. It's violet. I mean, my assumption is that it's gonna be Elizabeth Taylor. I also wanted to point out that I believe it was from the update podcast on 8/27, so not the announcement one, but my notes were like a little unclear if I'm being honest. This is a quote. "I see you, shiny girl." Many have discussed the potential connections both in positive and negative ways. Taylor is often compared to the Beatles. People will say that she's not as great as the Beatles, or when they hear that she's broken their records are outraged and immediately begin to tear her down with puts out so many variants, or she just puts a lot of money into her shows that she's just, it's all glitz, glam, shiny, if you will. It's not her talent that attracts people. It's these other things. During the Eras tour, bug flew into her mouth 2 times on stage, I believe. One I know was in London and the other one was in Cardiff, which if she did start recording TS12 during the European leg of the Eras tour, it would be interesting that both the times that happened there. Not to mention the fact that both times this happened, she was in orange. You think about the London date, interesting that it's London. First thing that came to mind for me was the idea of like a scarab, just because of the Egyptian connections with Elizabeth Taylor having one of her most iconic roles be portraying Cleopatra. So just the idea of a scarab bug and that, I think that also could be a potential connection. I'm a big believer in multiple things can be true, and you're gonna see that play out throughout this video. Any connections you can make, I think is interesting, regardless if they were intended or not. I hope you guys can see this. This is my notes for this video. This little guy right here is known as a Woods Jewel Scarab. Just thought that was interesting considering the color scheme. Look at this kind of blue, green, and then also wood. This is a jeweled scarab. This one is a flower beetle, or some people call it a purple jeweled. Here's another jeweled beetle. The color scheme is scheming. Also, again, this right here is shiny beetle. Can we just talk about this? I just found this to be a very interesting picture considering how many colors we have here. Now, obviously wintergreen and the purple with the Shiny Bug collection, those colors are all obviously present, but it goes beyond that, right? I mean, there's all of these colors are basically represented. Just thought that was an interesting note when I came across that visual. There's also the Baby That Show Business edition, the lovely Bouquet Golden vinyl. It's opaque golden, yellow metallic with orange and red splatter. And then the Lakeside Beach Blue Sparkle vinyl, translucent blue with black marbling and iridescent glitter. And then the Tiny Bubbles in Champagne edition, which comes with the Tiny Bubbles in Champagne edition poem. Well, they each come with a poem, obviously. Anyways, but it's under the Bright Lights vinyl, which is a pearlescent cream with a bubble splatter. And then the Red Lipstick and Lace vinyl, which is transparent with glitter, clear with metallic red and orange bubble splatter. Obviously, that's the name of poems, so I'm assuming those are going to be in the poem, but I do think the lovely Bouquet Golden, that could be a lyric or it could be in the poem, who knows. And then the last one is one that we do need to talk about, and I could talk about this for the next 35 minutes, but I'm not going to. I will spare you. But we do need to talk about at least some aspects of it. The Target exclusive, The Crowd Is Your King, which has a giant poster. And I did think it was interesting that they really emphasized giant. It is a giant poster, don't get me wrong, but they made it all caps and all that. And I don't know, part of me feels like maybe that could be a lyric or in a poem or something like that. Included all of these on my lyric card bingo that I have going. So it is there. The Summertime Spritz Pink Shimmer vinyl. It is opaque pink and pale yellow, pearlescent and gold shimmer. And I'm so sorry. I try to always take note of who sparked an idea or who said something, but for this one, I genuinely cannot find where I heard someone say this, so I am so sorry for not tagging that person. I think there's 2 places where that happened, but everything else I think I have credited, and they'll be linked in the description. One person had said that the curtains in the photo they think look to be the same as the ones that were behind her in the Midnight's Mayhem, which I thought was interesting. There's a lot of connections to previous works, obviously, but Midnight's is a big one, especially within the music videos. This is what is in question. I love the theories about how people are putting the Wall from the Man music video and how it looks like she's touching the poster that would have been the "if missing, take back to Taylor Swift" sign. You know, how this has all these works and how they kind of match up to the man wall, but also love the theory about how this kind of looks like a TV. TVs are framed in a lot of her homes. Could that be a Taylor's version? Who knows, but I love the theory. The other thing I wanted to point out was double exit sign, which we have seen the double exit sign thing in the other visuals. Obviously, there's the mirror, shards, or broken glass. There are so many ways you can take that. I have so many thoughts. The first time I saw it in that context, the first thing I thought of was encore. You know, it's like you leave the stage and then you have an encore. I just took a drink of my water bottle and it spilled all over my lap, and that is not a problem, except I have a flavoring for my water and it is bright blue, which is also why my tongue is bright blue as well. And Salem's here. Hi, Salem. This is not the time. You know, Torture Poet's apartment kind of came from necessity, and I think that is partially why she really highlighted, not only in the podcast, but during the TTPD era, about how much she needed to write during that time, because I do personally feel like that album was not as planned. And that is a prime example of where I think she does lay things where she has the potential to pull other threads if she needs to. At minimum, I think she had the concept for Showgirl during Midnight's era. There's so many connections, especially in the music videos, to Showgirl. It's insane. You know, that might be something we can look back at after we hear the album and kind of revisit Easter eggs, and I can go into deeper dives of those things. But I did want to at least mention that Nikki on TikTok, and again, it'll be linked below, had pointed out that the ring she's wearing in the Crowd Is Your King edition does look to be the same one at the beginning of the Bejeweled music video Stepmother wears. Interesting for a multitude of reasons, especially given that she's connecting it back to that, because the moment that that is happening is also when you have the Haim sisters behind her saying what they want, and what Taylor wants is the castle. She wants her home back. She wants her masters back, if you will. She can go anywhere, just not home. I do think it's interesting to call back to that. Now, I know you could look at that as the whole proposal thing, fair, but I also think it could be nodding to what we're about to get into here in just a moment. So just keep a pin in that. One thing that I've always said about that era, looking back at it during the TTPD era, was that the Haim sisters having fans, as in they are fans, those are things that the external world also is always asking for her. Critics, these types of things as well. So I do think, that's also an interesting thing to be nodding to that particular scene. And last thing I have to bring up with regards to that double exit sign is that Fire Prevention Week is that following week after the album drops. So it drops on Friday, and I think Fire Prevention Week starts on Saturday. And it is just still so cool to think back the era of plaid, right? When she was wearing all the plaid. And it is, you know, her mind when she was wearing the orange and green plaid, where she is photographed in front of a fire escape with the fire exit signs. That photo was taken on October 3rd, which was National Plaid Day, which is also the day this album comes out. It's the little things like that that make it so fun to be a Swiftie. Something that I remembered looking at the clocks during the TTPD era, but then I forgot. Shout out to her for actually remembering this. In the Fortnite music video, we see the clocks 2 times. The first time it's upside down and it was set to 12 and 8. And the second time, sorry about Salem, the second time we see a clock, it's upright and it was at 8:12. And we came to find out that perhaps the first one, 12:8, was alluding to the last Era's show, which was on 12/8, which was in Vancouver, which we now know, as Taylor Nation has said, that we left the key in Vancouver. And then that second one, August 12th, is when we got the announcement that The Life of a Showgirl was on its way at 12:12 a.m. Also, this one's the one that really gets me. It's when things like this happen. If she planned it, the leaps that this woman does for us is insane. If she didn't plan it, and this just happened, if that's not Tay Voodoo at work, I don't know what is. Because tell me why this woman on the podcast opened the case to show the album at the 1 hour and 28 minute mark, 12:08. And again, we know there's so much mirror imagery being done with the visuals that whether you want to look at that as the 12:08 or the 8:12. When I was looking at the podcast, I reacted to that. It's on Patreon. I have like a full live streamed reaction where I lose my absolute ever-loving mind. But I went searching. When I was looking at the background, one thing that bothered me was Travis's trophies being turned over, and that stood out to me because no player is going to have their trophy like that, especially one that important. Salem, please stop trying to sit on my iPad. These are my notes. Meg Adeline, who had a text exchange with someone saying that they were thinking of that championship trophy as pinnacle, right? It's the king, if you will. And the fact that it's on its side. Well, in chess, when you knock the king over, that's checkmate. Go back to the Heirs book and you go to the mastermind page, it is on page 224. Want to take a wild guess as to what the 224th day of the year is? You guessed it, 8/12, August 12th. What do you mean? This woman's brain. I skipped one thing. Also should have brought this up with the whole 8/12 thing. This is a very bizarre coincidence, okay? I'm not saying this was intentional. Planning a series, so I've been revisiting like each era and starting to gather things and looking at music videos and getting the links to things, put together all of my notes as well as like guides that might help people who are new to Taylor, which is what most of my subscribers are at this point. During that, I've watched a lot of them that I hadn't watched in a long time. In the You Belong With Me video, Taylor, when she's the cheerleader and she's got the dark hair on, there is literally 2 football players beside her, number 8 and number 12. Do I think this was intentional? Do I think that she was planning this since Fearless? No. But that, looking for things and seeing connections, like wild. Speaking of potential Easter eggs, in the background of the podcast announcement, obviously there was a ton of books in the background, and I could go on for a very long time about all the connections and all the cool ways that this could connect to Taylor, connect to potential ways the tracks could go and all of that, but we don't have time for that. I limited myself to 2 that I felt, 1, I hadn't seen anybody talk about, but 2, that might help best with what the rest of this video is. So the first one is Daniel Arsham, and on a website about one of his installations, it says that 6 of Arsham's large-scale sculptures are prominently displayed across the cooler Wisconsin grounds, including a championship golf course, and it creates a captivating outdoor expedition that highlights the beauty of decay. If you think about the connection with the color scheme with the oxidizing copper theory regarding the kind of mint color we have going on and the coppery orangey color. On that same note about colors, there was also a creator I saw that brought up the In Sync album, No Strings Attached, which also has 12 tracks and a very similar color scheme to TS12. The members are actually depicted as puppets, Pinocchio puppets, I'm just saying, on the cover, and that was because this was the first album that they released after leaving both their record label and their management team. And the reason they left was because there was a legal battle over what? You guessed it, the rights of their music and how they were being exploited out of their profits. Also, honorable mention that the release date of this album was on March 21st to 1/12. Just saying. And we obviously know that Taylor is a big NSYNC fan. Them presenting that, I think it was VMA award to her, where she's like fangirling on stage. I also found this TikTok of an artist that works with copper talking about oxidizing and what you can do, and I loved the way that she explained it. I'm gonna insert that.
Copper starts out in this shiny orange hue. As it's exposed to air, it oxidizes and gradually darkens in color. When exposed to a harsher environment, we get patinas of varying shades. Mostly known for its green patina. But did you know this effect can also be man-made? Nowadays we have store-bought chemicals that are able to consistently give us a desired color. But historically, artists used things of varying acidic levels, including urine.
Which brings us to the infamous man wall, where the wall that lists all of Taylor's works is peed on by the man. And this isn't the last time we saw imagery like this. The I Bet You Think About Me music video features a prominent stained glass window that happens to be in shades of orange. This character is practicing giving a speech while picturing Taylor in the mirror in front of the stained glass, and his friends listen along while taking a piss, possibly representing certain men within the music industry. But with enough muscle, you can scrub that patina away and bring back its initial shine.
The other person referenced in a book is named Slim Aaron, who was an American photographer who was noted for his images of socialites and jet setters, politicians, celebrities, even royals from around the world. He shot his most praised photo, called The Kings of Hollywood, at a 1957 New Year's Eve party. Clark Gable, Gary Cooper, James Stewart. He made a career out of what he called photographing attractive people doing attractive things at attractive places. He told the London Independent in 2002 they would invite me to their parties because they knew I wouldn't hurt them. I was one of them. No one really knew about his upbringing until after he passed away, and it turned out that his father had distanced himself from the family, and his mother, Stella, was actually sent to a psychiatric facility, or an asylum, if you will. He spent most of his childhood bouncing between some relatives like his aunt or grandmother, cousins, and orphanages. There were several documentaries that came out after he passed away, and a lot of the interviewees said that they assumed that if true origin had been known, his career probably wouldn't have taken off like it did, or potentially even happened within the restricted world that he had access to of these celebrities and these really privileged elite that his photography glamorized. Arguably the most important and notable connection that I want to bring up is that he has multiple shots that are named and are taken in Portofino, Italy, which vinyl, this one, Blank Space music video, anyone? There was a reason I kept this one, and I don't remember what it was off the top of my head. Oh, this is Party at the Romanoffs. I think it was just because it was Romanoffs. This one was Poet's Paradise. I just thought I would include it because poets, you know. This one's one of the Portofino images. This one, the color scheme, I just thought was interesting. It's got that blue, it's got the golds, it's got the orange, it's got the reds. It's literally got all of them. I just wanted to include it. I also just thought that was very interesting from like a showgirl perspective. This one I just kept because it was a cat. Here's one of the water images. I actually think this one might be in a pool. Yeah, it is a pool. Also just color scheme. This one is called Fan Mail. There was a bathtub one. I was like, wait, wasn't there? Okay, so this one with the bathtub. This one is at that New Year's Eve at the Romanoff party. This one is, I believe, another one of the Portofino images. So is this one. So is this one. This one, very showgirl, also the cats. I mentioned this earlier, how I like old Hollywood and, movies from that time and all that, and it's probably not connected at all, but it's just one of those things that it's interesting if you think about it. And to me, that is one of the beauties that Taylor brings to us, is how much we can learn and grow just by looking for things. Even if it's not connected, it's all knowledge we're gaining. So he was actually friends with Alfred Hitchcock, and his apartment is said to be what inspired Hitchcock's 1954 film Rear Window. In case you aren't familiar with that story, if you don't want spoilers, skip ahead. A photographer named L.B. Jeffries, who's played by James Stewart, who was in that photograph I mentioned earlier, his character breaks his leg, and while he's recovering, he starts spying on his neighbors from his New York City apartment. How he spies on them is that he looks through people's windows. His neighbors are a Broadway ballerina dancer who he refers to as Miss Torso and seems to be dating around. There's a songwriter / composer who has writer's block. There's another woman who he refers to as Miss Lonely Hearts, who basically throws like dinner parties for imaginary people. No one attends the parties. She just kind of acts it out, if you will. There's a couple who lower their dog in like a basket to the garden that they all share for it to go run around and play. And last, there is the Thorwald couple. The husband is a traveling costume jewelry salesman whose wife is bedridden. Jeff, the photographer, has two people who visit him during the film. One of them is his nurse who's coming to check on him, whose name is Stella. Interesting. Slim Aaron's mother's name was Stella. The other person who visits him is his fiancée Lisa Fairmont, who's elegant model and a dress designer. Her worry is that they're never actually going to get married, even though they're engaged, because he has a tendency to keep her at arm's length. He travels for his photography. He's only set in New York right now because of the injury. She says he would rather look at the lives of others than to live inside his own skin. At one point says what people ought to do is to get out of their own house and look in for a change. Stay with me. So one day Thorwald leaves his apartment with what looks to be like a woman who's dressed for travel and has like a suitcase, which happens while Jeff is sleeping. So he's not actively spying. Later, when he wakes up and he starts spying again, he notices that the wife is no longer there. And by piecing together several clues that he saw, there was a suitcase, there was a newly dug spot in the garden, there was a saw, among other things, Jeff begins to suspect that Mr. Thorwald has murdered his wife. One thing that's interesting about the way the film is actually shot is that what he sees, we see. So what conclusions he draws, we draw as the audience. Before he even tells you, you're already feeling suspicious because the pictures add up to this montage that's suspicious. Assumptions are made through the lens of the camera. Then the neighbor's dog that gets lowered in the basket turns up dead after Jeff sees the dog digging into the flower bed of the Thorwalds. So now he thinks that Thorwald also killed the dog. He ends up contacting a friend of his who's a detective, and the detective friend essentially just kind of brushes him off, tells him he'll look into it. He calls him later and says the wife went out for holiday, like the wife's already arrived, she sent him a postcard, and ultimately tells Jeff, stop looking into this. He ends up getting Stella and Lisa to help him investigate further because he just can't let it go. As the movie gets towards the end, he ends up calling Thorwald and draws him out of his apartment so that Lisa can go over and investigate the flower bed. She goes over there, she doesn't really find anything, but he is not back yet, and so she ends up climbing into his apartment to look for clues. While she's looking for clues, we see Miss Lonely Heart take out a bunch of pills and a glass of water, and Stella the nurse is worried that Miss Lonely Hearts is about to take her own life. She finally gets Jeff to call the police. He's starting to get the stuff to call the police when the songwriter finishes his song after he's had writer's block this whole time, starts to play it really loud, and it actually distracts Miss Lonely Hearts and she abandons her attempt. While this is all happening, Thorwald comes back to his apartment before Lisa can get out. Since Jeff was already in the process of calling the police, he continues the call and ends up telling him that there's been an assault preemptively because he feels like she's going to get caught. So she does end up getting caught, and there starts to be an assault happening, and the police end up arriving, end up actually arresting Lisa, who allows herself to be arrested so she can get to safety. While she's being arrested, she ends up flashing to Jeff that she's got Miss Thorwald's wedding ring on, letting him know that she's found a clue that she doesn't think that she's traveling. Unfortunately, Thorwald also realizes that she's signaling Jeff and realizes that Jeff can see through his window. So now he knows that Jeff knows. Thorwald ends up going to Jeff's apartment and attacking him, and the only defense that Jeff has is that his whole apartment is dark. So he snaps his camera, and the flash bulbs end up blinding him while they're kind of grappling. And luckily his detective friend arrives. They apprehend Thorwald, but by this point, Jeff has already been pushed out of the window and he's holding on. And while this is happening, Thorwald actually confesses that he did, in fact, murder his wife. The movie basically ends with Jeff ending up with his second leg broken. Again, I think it's more connected to the whole Portofino, Italy thing, but it is just kind of interesting to think about, you know, how this man's like looking through people's windows, how there's so many assumptions made through the lens. And if you watch the movie, there's undertones that it's too much for me to get into, but there's these undertones. Where's the line and when is too much? At one point, you know, Miss Lonely Hearts, one of her suitors, is kind of forcing himself on her. As the audience, you feel like, oh my God, is he gonna call someone and help and do something? And he like doesn't react. And luckily she ends up getting the man out of her apartment, but it questions like, where's the line? When do you step in? It's a very interesting film for a lot of reasons, but just the ethics of it. And I think ultimately for me, it was just interesting to think about the fact of like looking through people's windows and the assumptions that people make through a lens. Interesting connection, regardless of if it was intentional or not. I could talk about Easter eggs for hours. I'm trying to show some restraint here, but there were some that I am keeping in my mind that either we don't have time to talk about or that I haven't fully fleshed out yet. Love the whole theory about like the 12 songs being the 12 eras. I have reasons why I don't think that is and reasons why I think it could be. So rather than going really deep down that rabbit hole, I figured I'll just leave it till we get the album and see what I think about it, circle back to that. I also thought about the 12 Cycles of Karma, thought that might be interesting. Also, shout out to the fact that this album is coming on October 3rd, which is Mean Girls Day with, you know, what day is it? October 3rd. Regardless if that is a genuine connection or not, I do think it is interesting because of all of the Reputation callbacks that we've had. And on a different note about October 3rd, Just Be Thoughts on TikTok pointed out that I think it was a biography that she was reading about Clara Bow, that October 3rd was the day that she was admitted into one of the first psychiatric hospitals in the United States. Her doctor ended up discovering that Clara's personal identity was derived entirely from her professional activity, that she basically didn't feel like she had an identity of her own. Acting essentially allowed her to escape from reality. She sought treatment because she basically felt that off camera she didn't exist as an actualized person. The only thing she was this image they had of her. Regardless if that was an actual connection or not, it is very interesting to think about with the things that Taylor has said about feeling like she's gotten so big that she's not even a human anymore. She's just like an idea of sorts. I do think that is an interesting parallel. I'm also going to talk about the whole mirrors and the shattered images, breaking out of glass boxes and things like that. That's something we know we've been seeing throughout her discography. Think back to the Reputation CD. This is something we've seen. But I did want to shout out one of my mutuals on TikTok, and I will link her in the description and her playlist. I highly recommend going and watching it. It is a fascinating thing because one thing that I have been ruminating on was that whole shattered glass and the idea of the kaleidoscope and all eyes on me, I'm an illusionist. I'm so mad at myself for not making the connection that she made because I love the movies that she references in her theory, Magician and the Illusionist and all of that. And it's a really interesting perspective. Also just the briefcases, and how that has been, you think about the Meme music video, Bad Blood music video. I mean, there's so many examples of the briefcases that's an interesting thing that I'm trying to keep in the back of my head as well. The last one I wanted to point out was that I have been very interested in the Lover House for a very long time. I know there's a tons of theories out there that highlight, we don't need to get into it, but did she burn the Lover House down? Was it a different house? Was it a haunted house that she had built because she couldn't get her originals back, and how does that play in? The fact that the vinyl variants are essentially like kind of those same colors of the Lover House, that very interested in, and will continue to be looking out for things. So let's get into the general album predictions and kind of how I've come to the conclusions I have for the tracks that we're going to talk about here later in the video. Some key quotes to keep in mind from the podcast.
It just comes from like the most infectiously joyful, wild, dramatic place I was in my life. Yeah. And so that effervescence has come through on this record. And like, as you said, bangers. I always try to do something completely different if that's what I'm feeling at the moment. And I was feeling a complete pivot. I wanted the album to feel the way my life felt. And this completely matches the way that my life has felt. I also wanted it to be just every single song is on this album for hundreds of reasons, and you couldn't take one out and it be the same album. You couldn't add one and it's just right. And that focus and that kind of discipline with creating an album and keeping the bar really high is something I've been wanting to do for a very long time. I tend to love to write lots and lots of music. So it's a temptation to release lots of music.
Sure.
I wanted to do an album that was so focused on quality and on the theme and everything fitting together like a perfect puzzle.
Perfect puzzle pieces. When Jason asked her about the theme, she said, it's everything that was going on behind the curtain. Then she says,
my main goals were melodies that were so infectious that you're almost angry at it. And lyrics that are just as vivid, but crisp and focused and completely intentional. We had a conversation about how Max was like, I loved folklore. I loved the storytelling on folklore. I don't want that to change. Just because we're making these infectious anthems, I don't want you to leave that behind. And I was like, I don't think I couldn't if I tried. So at this point, I
got some stuff to say.
I'm married to that kind of writing, And so it was really amazing that we were able to, without doing too much overthinking, we were able to get in there and it was just ideas flying. And all of these ideas were like, we've been waiting years to come back together and make this project.
About Max Martin and Shellback and all of that, she said,
I essentially said to him, I want to be as proud of an album as I am of the Eras Tour, and for the same reasons, and he was like, do you understand what kind of pressure that is?
Yeah, I was about to say, that is okay.
I was like, yeah.
Why would you? Yeah, we can try.
Let's
so
go.
Your entire career? Got it. Yeah, we can do that in one album.
Let's do it.
Well, okay.
So it's like,
your entire career, got it. yeah, we can do that in one album. Let's do it. And she goes, so it's like, but she doesn't correct them. Just wanted to point that out. Then when she was talking about the album cover, she says, this represents the end of my night. When I'm on tour, I have the same day every single day, and my day ends with me in a bathtub, not usually in a bedazzled dress. I wanted to sort of like glamorize all the different aspects of how that tour felt. And the reason I wanted to have sort of like an offstage moment as the main album cover is because this album isn't really about what happened to me on stage. It's about what I was going through off stage. Lyrically of the album are, which is the life of a showgirl. It's the life behind it all. It's the life beyond the show. I know there have been some complaints regarding this album's rollout, but honestly, I don't think there would have been a better way to announce this particular album at this specific time for many reasons that I'll get into. Ultimately, I think she needed a safe space where she could have the freedom and the opportunity, set the stage, if you will, lay the foundation not only for her work, but to mitigate things for her life and the future headaches that it probably holds. I think one of the reasons she made a point to bring up the commencement speech she did a few years ago, highlight how the entire thing was riddled with Easter eggs, which is exactly what the podcast was, a 2-hour puzzle and Easter egg hunt. The way that so much of the sports world has behaved around her in the past is ridiculous. She attends a game to support her partner, just like tons of partners do, as if Taylor controls the cameraman who can't stop showing her over and over again, isn't just allowed to simply support a partner. If even a fraction of New Heights' typical listeners tuned in, or ESPN talked about it afterwards, things like that might help humanize her to sports fans. She revealed a lot, and she revealed a different side of her that many of them probably had never seen or like engaged with before. And what the majority of this video will be about hinges on what I would describe as one of my theories that feels like it's either going to be really on point or so badly misses the mark that it's comical. And you know, the thing is either way it'll be fun. The last time I feel like we saw Taylor that relaxed and open for that long, it had to be before Reputation. I mean, that felt like Tumblr days, the vlogs, Swiftmas. She's been more guarded, you know, technically since like the 1989 era, but definitely a Reputation era, and understandably so. But I think the podcast helped true personality or current perspectives and revealed a more grounded person that many would probably expect to see. Contrary to what many people believe, the majority of Swifties do not actually think that she's perfect or above any criticism. If we believed that, then we would basically be feeding into the dehumanization of her, except we would be coming from a place of the pendulum swinging in the opposite way. Pendulum swinging of the chaos it brings, but just basically the opposite way of the haters. However, I can't help but to think about how much discourse there has been around her. I mean, throughout her career, but especially over the past couple years, comes to the standards and the expectations of her. I do believe that there is a lot more nuance required than many would be willing to give the person that they perceive her to be. One thing that does always get me though is when people claim that she's, you know, always playing the victim. And it's funny because she's the person who arguably takes and learns from constructive criticism better than the majority of people that I can think of. Every single time that she's reinvented herself, what you get is somewhat born out of the criticism from the previous project or era. After Fearless, despite what the other writers in the room were saying, the consensus was that there was no way a young girl could be carrying her weight in those writing sessions. She comes back with an entirely self-written album, which is Speak Now. When Red was criticized for being all over the place and needing to pick a lane, she responded with 1989, which is one of the most, to quote, sonically cohesive and focused proper pop albums with hardly any contemporary references. Lover comes out and people think it's immature or it's too bubblegum pop, and so she comes back with Folklore. I mean, the list goes on and on. That said, I don't want to downplay the fact that I do think a lot of it is her genuine artistic evolution. I don't think it's all in response to criticism. I think she will always take her own approach on what feels right, but I do think she's paid attention and continues to utilize things that have a proven track record. You know, like cheat codes, if you will. And some of those foundational cheat codes include listening to constructive criticism, maintaining a strong relationship with fans by always prioritizing them, listening to their feedback, and keeping them engaged with things like the Easter eggs. People complained about TTPD. It was too long of an album. It was too wordy. Playing a pretend poet. Where's the pop? She needs to stop working with the same producers. So she's going to give us a focused 12-track pop album with 2 of the top pop producers in the world. However, it'll never appease everyone. Her repeated reinventions prove that. Continue to do precisely what is asked of her, and it's never going to be right or enough. I think as she's gained more autonomy and ownership and creative control, she's defied the odds and she's pushed against the boundaries of the industry, regardless of being assigned labels like conniving or that she's a bully or punching down or suing everyone. She's greedy industry corporate Barbie. Like, to me, given her track history, it's clear that she highly values and supports artist rights. People are always so quick to forget that she has a track record of trying to utilize the leverage that she's gained, and she's been credited by, inspiring a modern day vinyl revolution. She stood up to streaming companies multiple times, negotiated her own contract to benefit other artists, all the other artists under the UMG label. She's proven the industry wrong time and time again by not always playing by their rules, but by always prioritizing the connection with the fans, which is what allowed her to have such a successful re-recordings project, switching genres over and over again, things like that. So my prediction is that this album will likely rub people the wrong way, at least initially, or initially be dismissed. Especially like outside of the Swiftie community, similar to how Reputation was taken back in 2017. I think that this album is going to be messy and theatrical and kind of that recession pop feeling. Some of the taking on personas or leaning into certain stereotypes and character archetypes that are thrust upon her. I think there's a potential for there to be like a borderline satirical edge or an air of almost oxymoronic if you think deeper about it. At first glance, I think that some of them will seem, showy, braggadocious, or, I'm in love and now my life is perfect. However, beneath that storyline, I think a deeper story will be unfolding if you're willing to look for it. She made a deliberate effort to kind of highlight performative art, and in the background of the podcast announcements, it was full of books that were about artists and poets and activists. I think the album will appear to be what many expect from an artist that has the stereotypes that are placed upon her. For example, let's look at the opening track, The Fate of Ophelia. The more traditional view of Ophelia is either that epitome of innocence, fragile, naive woman who eventually loses her mind after a heartbreak and drowns or unalives herself. The more feminist perspective of what Ophelia represents is a product of the constraints and expectations and systematic oppression of her time, where she's silenced and exploited and has a lack of agency and autonomy, perhaps viewing her final act as escaping and taking back her power in the only way she felt she could. I think that's exactly what many people will expect when they hear that track name, a rewriting of the end of Ophelia's story, just like Taylor did in one of the clearest and earliest examples, which would be with Romeo and Juliet in Love Story. Something like Travis aiding in changing the story of Ophelia because he loved her for her. And there's nothing wrong with that. It'll make a lot of Swifties happy to get a pop banger love song. I think you're going to have to look beyond that initial level to really see the deeper meaning and the deeper stories. And not that that's different from her entire discography. I just think when it's packaged in, a pop type sound like, 1989, people don't realize those deeper meanings. My guess is that she would, actually be talking to herself, or perhaps even the other showgirls that are coming up after her. That could be the layer under it, or even a metaphor about how the Eras Tour changed everything. I think as time has gone on, she's really wanting to see just how much she can impact and change the industry, because that's where she feels like she can do the most, feels like she can be the most effective. And in that pursuit, I think she's learned that she has to separate herself from, Taylor Swift, the brand. In the past, she's talked about feeling dehumanized to the point where people treat her like an idea and not like an actual person. The podcast allowed people to view her outside of the brand of Taylor Swift, the showgirl, if you will. What I think the beauty of it all is, and it has been, because again, this is nothing new, is that just moving the way that she has throughout her career in of itself is an act of defiance. They say she's greedy and they group her in with every other billionaire. And that's a whole other conversation, but how many stories have you heard about her exploiting labor? Instead, you find stories about an employer who's retained so much of her staff, who pays extremely fairly, who's always given great benefits, even when that's not necessarily the standard industry practice, who regularly gives bonuses to her staff and has built her fortune with the art that she's created. Do I think that she's above criticism? No. And I can recognize that she benefits from a system. Do I believe she could give more of her money away? Yes. I think everyone who would be classified in the top 1% could do more. Do I believe in the idea of a ethical billionaire? No, because I think the system itself is unethical. However, I do not believe that we should rely on the ultra wealthy to donate their money. I believe the government should be set up to ensure equitable taxation and not intentionally prioritize wealth inequality. That said, I can also acknowledge the difference between someone like Taylor Swift and the people that she is so often grouped in with, which is people like Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, and Mark Zuckerberg. My intention is not meant to defend billionaires, but rather to just highlight the nuances and the realities of the points that are so often made status as a billionaire as the reason why they can't support her or that they think that she deserves their hate. Because these points are often applied to her, but they're not applied to those who are actually peers or of a similar status to her, which in fact is not someone like Bezos. I think it's fair to at least acknowledge the difference between someone like Taylor Swift and billionaires who are purchasing our government. Could she handle certain things differently or do more? Yes. Honestly, that applies to most people. But I can also understand the tightrope someone like Taylor is walking, like having the President of the United States who is actively dismantling the foundations of our democracy and is the face of a violent white supremacist Christian nationalist extremist regime who frequently vocalizes his hatred for her and everything she represents, having to cancel shows due to terrorist threats, and having a group of children brutally murdered at a Taylor Swift dance class. And that's just the tip of the iceberg, how that would impact the way that you operate in the world. And every time I see yet another social media rant about Taylor Swift's net worth or a comment attacking a Taylor Swift fan, I just can't help but think about how much more effective and impactful all of that energy spent would be if it was sent towards those in government whose job it is to represent the people of this nation. Heck, even going to those who are doing the most harm, those who have amassed their wealth through illegal means, exploitative practices, those who use their wealth to lobby and purchase the government for their own gain at the expense of everyone else. Those who use their wealth to create weapons of mass destruction and cause harm to the world. Instead of artists who gained the majority of their wealth by being popular for the art that they've created. They say she isn't doing anything, which isn't true. But even if you were to ignore the things that she has said, the things that she has done, the causes that she attends events for, that she donates to, couldn't one argue that using your art to encourage the level of critical thinking, pattern recognition, and research that Swifties do has a beneficial impact that extends far beyond just her art? How many people are rereading and deeply researching Shakespeare's Hamlet and the impact that the character of Ophelia has had in film, books, paintings? And those are just the surface level ones. I think about all of the literary works and poets, artists, writers, events that she's referenced throughout her discography, their stories, their art, their lives, and all the research and knowledge that I've gained just by being interested in her music. Even the announcement of this album has caused so much uproar around her having the audacity to release an album during a time like this. Proves the point further. Art has always been produced during times of darkness, unrest, and instability throughout human history. Crises have always been a time for creation for artists and creatives alike. Some art will reflect it and therefore document it, and some stand in defiance of it, lighting up the darkness by creating these moments of happiness and sparking joy even when the world feels so dark and feels like there's nothing left. I can't help but think about Monet painting his final masterpieces that were the large water lilies, all while battles were raging on right down the road from his home. He spent the last 12 years of his life creating something that he believed would honor those who lost their lives and would bring renewed hope to the country and the world alike. His last wishes were to have those hung in the Orangerie Museum. I always say that weird, I know, I'm sorry. Which was created just for those gifts, only for them to not be appreciated. They weren't received well. Mind you, during his lifetime, he was one of the most famous painters in the world. Yet they ended up displaying other works in front of it, had dog shows in there. The building was bombed in World War II. There was shrapnel ended up in the works. And then the most significant offense of all was for the rooms to be built over with a concrete ceiling, which completely blocked out the natural light from the room and therefore the works. And they remained like that for 3 decades. One of his earlier paintings of water lilies was displayed in the New York Museum of Modern Art, where it became extremely popular and people were traveling from all over to go see it. Abstract Impressionists in America coveted it, and they started traveling over to see his final masterpieces. He wasn't known as an abstract painter, rather his works opened the door for abstract impressionists. The people who were visiting it couldn't believe that they were being displayed in the way that they were. Finally, in 1996, the museum undertook a significant renovation, which ultimately created a big skylight and restored the intended experience that Monet had always envisioned. I'm not trying to make this album seem like it's changing the world, but I think creating during times like this is one of the most authentic things that creatives can do with what they're feeling inside and what they feel called to do. I think she was very intentional when connecting the storytelling of folklore, but really putting an emphasis on how differently it would be packaged. The surface level lyrics may not be the only story being told. It may not be the only way of interpreting things. I think the podcast format was particularly well suited for this album. It allowed her the space to include so many potential clues so we can begin theorizing and perhaps identify deeper layers quicker. I also think that it was key that all of the track titles were given at once and there wasn't a more like interactive way of unveiling them like we did with Midnight's Mayhem, is because I think there's layers that could potentially overlap between songs. Putting a spotlight on the fact that each song is on the album for hundreds of reasons is also a response to TTPD, because if you listen to TTPD and you think that every song that sounds like it's about a romantic relationship, that it couldn't be a metaphor for other things, I implore you to go listen to it again or check out one of my favorite creators, Britton Ray, I believe is how you say it, who does an absolutely phenomenal job of exploring additional narratives that are woven through TTPD. She's a creator that consistently take the thoughts right out of my head, but she presents them in a way that's much more digestible and eloquent. Because every time I try to discuss it, my inability to self-edit takes over, and that's neither here nor there. Even the way that Taylor described this album nods to multiple reasons. Think about the word effervescence. Vivid, enthusiastic, energetic. But it also means bubbles in liquid or fizz. Like the Under the Bright Lights variant with the bubble splatter vinyl. That also includes a tiny bubbles in champagne poem. Album will be the ultimate mirror ball moment. What does the listener want to see? Pop, girly in love, you'll get it. You just want to pop bangers that you can dance to? It's there. The deeper layers of her life, look past that initial narrative and see the analogies that she's working through. Her relationship to how things are affecting her these days has become, I would assume, a lot healthier than, for example, in the days of Reputation. That's another layer as to why I think that Reputation is being highlighted a lot, because even though these topics like fame and the industry are messed up, it's coming from the place of someone who has basically gotten to the top and is finally allow herself to have these moments of like, damn, I've made it. She also has a really supportive partner who fully supports her being Bejeweled. So I don't think that her saying that on the podcast prevents my theories from being a possibility. The storytelling of folklore, along with looking at the ways that I could see the tracks going, maybe these are the lessons of the Showgirl, which is why her track with Sabrina, a younger Showgirl, is at the very end. It's like to end the story. Like think Cher teaching Christina Aguilera in Burlesque. Some could be positive and some may be more negative. Since the narrator is the Showgirl, it's all going to be presented these fun, joyful, infectious anthems. So my track predictions are also based on some other things that I would like to highlight. Some of them are a little more unhinged. I'm just warning you. So initially I was 100% on board with the whole that this album's timeline would not have matched up with her being able to gain ownership of her masters. However, there is so much feels like a full circle moment and I just couldn't get it out of my head. And then it hit me why. As the Eras Tour played out and as the re-recordings project were becoming so successful. It's not like Shamrock wasn't aware of what was going to happen to that particular asset, nor that they didn't already want to work with her. They wanted to reach out beforehand, but the deal that Scooter had set up prevented them from talking to her until the deal had gone through. A letter of response that she sent to Shamrock. I was thrilled with the idea of working with people who value art and understand how much my life's work means to me. I immediately began to plan all the ways we could work together on expanding and protecting my music while maximizing the outcomes for all involved, especially my fans. So regardless of the fact that it was my second time my masters had been sold without my knowledge, while I was actively trying to purchase them, your letter brought me a great deal of hope for my musical legacy and our possible future together. This is why I was so disappointed when I learned that under the terms of your acquisition, Scooter Braun and Ithaca Holdings would continue to receive many years of future financial reward for my music masters, music video, and album artwork. If I support you as you request, I will be contributing the future payments to Scooter Braun and Ithaca Holdings, and I simply cannot in good conscience bring myself to be involved in benefiting Scooter Braun's interests directly or indirectly. As a result, I cannot currently entertain being partners with you. It's a shame to know that I will now be unable to help grow the future of these past works, and it pains me very deeply to remain separated from the music I spent over a decade creating. But this is a sacrifice I have to make to keep Scooter Braun out of my life. I'm very sorry he has put you in this position. I wish this could have been a better outcome, and please do let me know if your firm is ever completely independent from Scooter Braun and his associates. She also said, I feel the need to be very transparent with you. I will be going forward with my original re-recording scheduled and will be embarking on that effort soon. I know this will diminish the value of my old masters, but I hope you will understand that this is my only way of regaining the sense of pride I once had when hearing songs from my first 6 albums, and also allowing my fans to listen to those albums without feelings of guilt for benefiting Scooter. So that, keep a pin in that. I know I'm asking you to keep a lot of pins and things, but I swear it's gonna make sense in a minute. At least I hope so. Anyways, there was callbacks across her discography. Particularly, I would say, like I said earlier, with Midnights, but also I think we definitely need to highlight the reputation of it all. We don't have the time to go through all of the connections that I would like to talk about. However, I do want to highlight at least some of them. The first one is the fact that there's poems associated with this. Now, for the sake of time, I'm not going to reread all of them, but when we get to certain tracks, I'm probably going to call back to them. However, I encourage you to go read them. You can get them off like Genius, but it's important to look at the Why She Disappeared, If You're Anything Like Me, also the Reputation prologue. And then the last one is The Trick to Holding On, which was in her Vogue cover in January 2018. Obviously, another interesting point is that very visible showgirl who's claiming and embracing their star power with a photo shoot at the same theater that the Delicate music video was shot. From Reputation, she is basically like a sad showgirl who turns invisible. Just think that's interesting. I've been neutral when it comes to the idea of karma or a lost album. I've seen theories that, if proven true, would make complete sense, and I've also seen debunking theories, if true, would lead it to be probably one of the biggest clowning moments the fandom has ever done. But I don't think that that's the point. Taylor has said that she's basically always writing. Suppose you take into consideration how she coped with the events that eventually led to TTPD, a 31-track double album. I would argue that a significant writing likely occurred prior to the Kim Ye incident. She was already being made out to be a villain before that incident even occurred. During During an interview in the Lover era, she gave a description of how she sees Easter eggs. She used the Look What You Made Me Do music video as a reference point. She says, and I quote, "I think it'll take them a decade to find them all or fully understand." Planned at the time, or she at least planned to circle back to in the future, is essential to keep in mind. Many were perplexed by the scene where she's in the cage and she's in orange. It wasn't the fact that she was caged, because there were grounds for that symbolism. Feeling like she had to hide away, that she was being punished for a crime she didn't commit, wearing orange as if she was being jailed. So it's my understanding that that's when people really started theorizing that the cage was bigger than just her being caged during that period. Perhaps it was something that didn't get to happen because this happened, that she ended up having to do a response with the Reputation album. Or perhaps it was a double meaning, since we know from the Times article that happened years later that things had been rocky with Big Machine for longer than we really knew. She knew that her 6th album was the last of that initial contract. So she very well may have known that coming to favorable terms was going to be difficult, if not impossible. I believe the first time that we saw the idea of karma, the name, was in the Man music video, which did have a lot of proven Easter eggs. And there was the orange karma graffiti tags been included in a lot of the Reputation imaging and music videos. And further, that her other album names were in a specific pattern that ended up connecting to the re-recordings process. Many people started thinking, that's Karma, that's the name of the album. Now, people who are kind of anti the Karma, the album theory, Orange Karma was more alluding to the idea of karma. Her pursuit in the re-recordings to basically break out of the cage was the reason why that was chosen. Regardless of which way you interpret that, I think at a minimum, one could at least agree that even if the Reputation orange was always supposed to be there, not in association to a lost album, choosing that color would inherently draw us back there. We know that she's fully aware of this theory too, because when she announced the Karma track during Midnight's Mayhem, she literally laughed. She knew that claiming that name as a track title was going to send everyone into a tizzy. And then when we got the music video for Karma, it also included so many Easter eggs. And then obviously all the connections. There's the connections with the same photographers who did her shoot for the Reputation album cover. And I think it's important to talk about that because they did work with her another time. And I would just like to show you some photos in case you haven't seen them. So January of 2018 is on the cover of British Vogue. This is the cover. This is also one of the photos. Do we see the water? More water. It's murky. You can't see all the way through it. And if this isn't a Clara Bow moment, I don't know what is. Water. We are submerged in the water. And then this is the last one. And lastly, how sus she was when Jason asked why orange. He says while laughing. I've just always liked it, Jason. I don't know. Feels like kind of energetically how my life has felt. And this album is about what was going on behind the scenes in my inner life during this tour, which was so exuberant and electric and vibrant, which at the beginning of the podcast, she had already stated was what allowed her to reclaim her original masters, which ultimate symbol of karma. Just feel like there's some connections there. I'm just saying. And that brings me to the Times article when she won Person of the Year in 2023. The timeline context is this is announced on December 6th, 2023, and the interview states that the interview is happening on a fall day. She was officially dating Travis. So in theory, TTPD was most likely done or close to it since it came out in April. At minimum, she's been thinking about the next album. Some of the quotes that I think are relevant to the life of the showgirl. If you've already read it, feel free to skip ahead. Here's the top things I wanted to point out. This is the interviewer. After all, while she's long been one of the biggest entertainers in the world, this year is different. It feels like the breakthrough moment of my career happening at 33. And for the first time in my life, I was mentally tough enough to take what comes with that. And then it goes on to say, this is her story, even if she's now so high that it's hard to believe she was ever low. This one I thought was interesting. It was a quote from Stevie Nicks about Taylor. She said, "I don't give Taylor advice about being famous. She doesn't need it." For Swift, it's a peak. "This is the proudest and happiest I've ever felt, and the most creatively fulfilled and free I've ever been. Ultimately, we can convolute it all we want or try to overcomplicate it, but there's only one question." Here she adopts a booming voice. "Are you not entertained?" Goes on and says, a few months before, I sit with Swift in New York on a summer night in Santa Clara, California, which has been temporarily renamed Swifty Clara in her honor. I'm in a stadium with nearly 70,000 other people having a religious experience. The crowd is rapturous. She gazes out at all of us, all high on the same drug. Her fans are singularly passionate, not just in the venue, but also online, as they analyze clues, hints, and secret messages in everything from her choreography to her costumes, some deliberately planted, others not. I'm laughing because as I sit here, in this hours-long video, I knew this tour was harder than anything I'd ever done before by a long shot, Swift says. Each show spans over 180 minutes, including 40 plus songs from at least 9 albums. There are 16 costume changes, pyrotechnics, and optical illusion, where she appears to dive into the stage and swim, and not only one, but 2 cottagecore worlds, which feature an abundance of moss. Optical illusion. Just wanted to highlight that as well. That particular optical illusion we will discuss. I swear I'm almost to the tracks. I promise. Thank you for staying. Taylor effect was noticed at the highest levels of government. When the Federal Reserve mentions you as the reason economic growth is up, that's a big deal, which was a quote from a finance professor at Duke. I tell Swift that the show made me think of the meme that says, quote, do not kill the parts of you that is cringe, kill the part of you that cringes. Yes, she explains, every part of you that you've ever been, every phase you've ever gone through was you working it out in the moment with the information you had available to you at the time. There's a lot I look back at like, wow, a couple years ago I might have cringed at this. You should celebrate who you are now, where you are going, and where you have been. Next one is getting to this place of harmony with her past work. There's a dramatic irony, she explains, to the success of the tour. It's not lost on me that 2 great catalysts for this happening were 2 horrendous things that happened to me. Swift says, this is where my story takes a turn. The first was getting canceled within an inch of my life and sanity, she says plainly. The second was having my life's work taken away from me by someone who hates me. So this is after the Fearless era and the VMAs incidents. She says, quote, I realized every record label was actively working to try to replace me. She says, I thought instead I'd replace myself first with a new me. It's harder to hit a moving target. Next, Swift said she had to keep innovating. Quote, by the time an artist is mature enough to psychologically deal with the job, they throw you out at 29 typically. In the 90s and early 2000s, it seems like the music industry just said, okay, let's take a bunch of teenagers, throw them into a fire, and watch what happens. By the time they've accumulated enough wisdom to do their job effectively, we'll find new teenagers. Kimya cancellation. She felt like it was career death, she says. She had also satisfied her record deal with Borchetta and knew she wanted out. The molecular chemistry of that old label was that every creative choice I wanted to make was second guessed. She says, I was really overthinking these albums. Next one. She frames the strategy as a coping mechanism. It's all in how you deal with the loss. I respond to extreme pain with defiance. That was about the re-recordings. She considers, but I've also learned that there's no place in actively trying to quote unquote defeat your enemies. Trash takes itself out every single time. She tells me about revisiting Reputation, which is perhaps the most charged era in the tour. It's a gothic punk moment of female rage at being gaslit by an entire social structure, she says, laughing. I think a lot of people see it and they're just like, sick, snakes, and strobe lights. The upcoming vault tracks for Reputation will be, quote, fire, she promises. The re-recordings project feels like a mythical quest to her. I'm collecting Horcruxes, she says. I'm collecting Infinity Stone. Gandalf's voice is in my head every time I put out a new one. For me, it is a movie now. She is a maestro in self-determination of writing her own story. Multi-hyphen television creator Shonda Rhimes, no stranger to a plot twist, who has known Swift since she was a teenager, puts it simply, quote, she controls the narrative not only in her work, but in her life. She says, it used to feel like people were taking shots at her. Now it feels like she's providing the narrative so there aren't as many shots to be taken. And then at the end of the article, there's this really interesting section that the author ends up saying. Here being the article in the interview. Here, Swift has told me a story about redemption, about rising and falling only to rise again, a hero's journey. I do not say to her in our conversation that it did not always look that way from the outside. That, for example, when Reputation's lead single, Look What You Made Me Do, reached #1 on the charts, or when the album sold 1.3 albums in the first week, second only to 1989, she did not look like someone whose career had died. She looked like a superstar who was mining her personal experience as successfully as ever. I am tempted to say this, but then I think, who am I to challenge it? If that's how she felt. The point is, she felt canceled. She felt as if her career had been taken away from her. Something in her had been lost, and she was grieving it. Maybe this is the real Taylor Swift effect, that she gives people, many of them women, particularly girls, who have been conditioned to accept dismissal, gaslighting, and mistreatment from a society that treats their emotions as inconsequential, permission to believe that their interior lives matter. That for your heart to break, whether it's from being kicked off a tour or by the memory of a scarf still sitting in a drawer somewhere, or because someone else controls your life's work, it's a valid wound. And no, you're not crazy for being upset about it or for wanting your story to be told. The one thing that does keep kind of bothering me is that damn fire heart emoji. If this is an album that has been wanting to make for a very, very long time, like she said, I could make a case that perhaps the connections to Reputation, for example, and the idea of karma, these concepts were sparked back then. Maybe after she realized she was for sure leaving Big Machine and she was gonna have to fight to get her master's. I'm talking like before Scooter was even in the picture. She was already thinking about the day when it would all come full circle. Then over time, she started to build on this idea. What if she's been weaving these threads that she could pull on when the time came? It doesn't necessarily mean that it was at the time that she knew she had the master's back, but maybe more that she knew that time was coming. The Eras tour had been so successful, the re-recordings project had been so successful. With that asset losing value every day, you don't think that Shamrock wouldn't have told her, listen, here is when Scooter will stop benefiting? She may not have wanted to ever believe it to not get her hopes up, but it doesn't mean that she couldn't have thought, there's a light at the end of the tunnel that keeps getting closer and closer, and there's a really good shot that this could happen. But I don't want to jinx it. And I think that's all completely plausible. The only thing is, like, why not just use the orange heart emoji? Why bring in the fire emoji when she stated default tracks for Rep were going to be fire? And also, why make so many callbacks to Reputation when she already knew she was having a hard time re-recording it? I mean, I know that was at the end of 2023, so maybe she thought in 2024 she would be successful in actually re-recording it. That's it. But I don't know. She had to know that we were going to make a connection with using the fire one. But I also just can't see her dropping those at the same time. I mean, maybe it would be like an announcement after Showgirl drops, announce that the Reputation vault tracks will come, next March or something like that, but then I keep going back to the idea of a fire exit. And if the vault tracks are fire and she's showing us so many fire exits, like exiting for the fire, but again, I just cannot wrap my head around her dropping it at the same time. Now, granted, she hasn't ever defined what a vault track is. A vault track, technically, wouldn't have to be something that she, previously fully recorded, but it was just scrapped from the album. Could it be that some of all that writing that I presume that she did during that era, that maybe there was a concept, but just much less fleshed out? Not to mention, if the plan was that those parts weren't going to be used until she felt like that chapter would soon be closing, i.e. she could see a world in which she would have her master's, or the re-recordings were done, something like that, it wouldn't have mattered if they were vault or not. Alternatively, maybe because she does own the masters now, she's more comfortable calling it TS12 and not at vault because she doesn't have to anymore. Maybe this whole album will be her rewriting history or flipping things on their head because of the lessons she's learned and how karma has played out. So maybe it'll be fixing the story that she previously said. For example, from Rep, Are You Ready For It? Burton to this Taylor. Just food for thought. Let's talk about the track list. So the opening track, to say I'm excited about it would be an understatement. I am thrilled. So the first thing that we need to talk about is obviously when Taylor Nation said, I'll see you next era, and it had the 12 pictures, we assume those correspond to the tracks because the last one, including Sabrina being the 12th photo, 12th track does feature Sabrina. It makes sense. I'm trying to keep those in mind in these predictions as well. One thing that I do think is interesting is that that photo does have 2. When I saw that initially, I knew a lot of people were going to think like double album, but for me, my first thought was double narrative. That is where the seeds started being planted for my whole thing about perhaps this is going to sound like one thing but be another thing, and there could be layered meanings, and that's why there's 100 reasons. There is a ton of different ways to put the puzzle together. I'm very intrigued by the Fate of Ophelia, and I feel like that track is going to connect. There's always some tracks on the previous project. Usually there's at least one that kind of gives a vibe of the next project, and there's usually one that kind of links back to the previous one. But even more than that, I think there is an additional thing where it seems like the track ones have some sort of connection. They end up having somewhat of a bridge while also having somewhat of a way of setting up the rest of the project. So the Fate of Ophelia being the opening track is fascinating to me. One thing that I really love is seeing the connections and how threads weave throughout Taylor's discography. It's one of my favorite parts about being a Swiftie. And water is one of the most fascinating ones that I explore when I'm thinking about how she has used water in different capacities, whether that be talking about rain or tears or sinking into water or feeling like you're drowning, using water to express emotions. We have had an unbelievable amount of instances visually, lyrically, written throughout Taylor's career that's connected with water. Back from the back cover of the debut album, she is in like a creek. She's in water all the way up to now. To put it in perspective, last night I tried to make the list. It's mostly song lyrics. If it talks about water multiple times in one song, I'm just counting that as one. But between like music videos I could think of off the top of my head and lyrics, British Vogue cover shoot, I came up with like 71. The majority of the 71 is songs. She has used water as a motif for a whole host of things to convey emotions, cleansing, rebirth and survival, public scrutiny, memories, changes, transformation, relaxation, escape. This is not all of them, but just some ones where I thought was, interesting. For example, in the Why She Disappeared poem, which is associated with the Reputation magazines, towards the end of it says, when she stood with a desolate knowingness, waded out into the dark, wild ocean up to her neck, bathed in her brokenness, said a prayer of gratitude for each chink in the armor, which I do think is interesting, given the bathtub with the dress. It looks a lot like the Midnight's bodysuit, which I think is part of it, but also it does kind of look like a glamorized version of like the chain mesh. I think that, is it chainmail? And we'll come back to that poem. But obviously I've already said a little bit about my theories about this track earlier in the video when I was explaining what I think the kind of the narrative will be and how I think it'll be partially about Travis, but that there will be a deeper layered meaning. And in that potential deeper layered meaning, I'd like to point this one out. In Dancing with Our Hands Tied, it says, I'd hold you till the water rushes in. My understanding is that that song came from a negative interaction with paparazzi and feeling like her partner at the time would leave because of these types of interactions that were going to plague him when he was with her. There's also an interesting connection to another song that I'm going to bring up in a minute, which is The Bolter. That is a top song for me. Once that came out, I was very interested in how it connected across her discography. And that's a whole other thing. But the point is that, in my opinion, is a potential connection with The Bolter, with the Frozen thing, because in Dancing with Our Hands Tied, it has the my love had been frozen, deep blue, but you painted me golden. And don't even get me started on the whole, don't look at that as like romantic love if you're thinking about like her work. And we could go down a rabbit hole. I'm gonna spare you. The Lover music video where she is in the fishbowl, in the cardigan music video, that's where there's the piano and she's like basically like fighting to keep herself from drowning in the water. And in the behind the scenes video, the forest, she says, represents the evergreen beginning of a relationship where everything seems magical and full of beauty. The ocean represents the isolation and fear involved while a relationship is breaking down. When she goes back into the cabin, it represents her returning to a sense of self after experiencing love loss, but her clothes remain soaking wet in order to signify that she was changed by the journey. There's also the connection with the Lavender Haze music video, which is arguably the precursor to with that milky-ish, where she's just like bathing in that and there's all the flowers around her. When I remember when seeing that the first time, I was like, that's very Ophelia coded. Also, for the record, I'll post the clip of it. I watched the podcast on live stream. I didn't know that there was anything on the website, but when she showed the cover, the first words out of my mouth before I heard the track list was Ophelia?
This is my brand new album.
Is that a play on Ophelia? Oh, the chills. Oh my god. It's like broken. Is that like broken glasses? Was it a mirror ball? Oh, is it like a broken mirror? Oh my god, stop. The way the life, V in the life, stop it. Stop it right now. Oh, excuse me. Just saying. Anyways, so water has been a prominent theme throughout her discography. I feel like the Fate of Ophelia, there is going to be a juxtaposition between, the title and like the sound, right? Like we know it's going to be pop bangers. And so the fact that she chose that to be the opening track and that she chose to use Ophelia, as soon as I heard that was a track title, I kind of predicted how the response would be. And it was. When I got online, I got on the wrong side. It reminded me a lot of the Fearless era when she did Romeo and Juliet, when she like rewrote it, because there was a lot of like haters during that point who were essentially like, she thinks she knows Shakespeare. It's like, because she does. Like, anyways, and this was no different. It was that all over again. And this was a narrative that we saw throughout the TTPD era, where a lot of the criticism and stuff was, her comparing herself to a poet. And it's funny because I've seen a couple of videos of people talking about like, she's not a showgirl. And I'm like, people were mad when she had the Torture Poets department and that she was trying too hard. And then she gives you pop princess burlesque showgirl. And it's like, that's not her either. People. But I also think it's interesting that she chose Ophelia because it does kind of remind me a little bit of the Fearless era and that kind of like how people viewed her as like this naive girl when she rewrote Romeo and Juliet, even though I'm still blown away that she did that at that age. Most people looked at it favorably, but there was always those people, right? It is interesting that she's taking the Fate of Ophelia in this, which kind of does act in a way as a bridge because a lot of people would think that the Fate of Ophelia would have been something that would have been on TGPD. That would have made sense. But to do it on this album, knowing that the sound is supposed to be, infectious and upbeat, that even if it is changing the Fate of Ophelia, which is what I expect it to be, rewrite the story, it's going to be divisive to a certain extent. And I think in a way like that is the point. Because even when she does give you the deeper depth of a poet, you think folklore, you think Evermore, you think TTPD. The moment that she steps out of that box and does something more pop, there's going to be so many people who are going to say that that's all she can do and exclude that part of her story. And I think that is in a way going to play into whatever the deeper narrative ends up being, which again, as I said earlier, I could see it being, her lessons to the showgirls or her saving herself, changing her own fate. But the surface level being like something about her love and Travis in some capacity. And I do think there's also something to be said about how history has taken the character of Ophelia and reimagined her, and how there has been times that those reimaginings have led to similar tragedies. Arguably the most famous is John Everett's rendition and painting of Ophelia, and I'm sure there's tons of people talking about this, the model Elizabeth Siddal. And just for the sake of time, I'm not going to go super deep into the story, but there are parts that when they talk about it, I'd like to give a different perspective. So for example, Elizabeth Siddal, who is the person who sat for it, was an artist herself. She was also a poet. Do I wish that her fate would have been what it was? Absolutely not. If she would have known what would have happened, would she have still made the same choices? Perhaps not, but we don't know that. In no way, shape, or form am I saying this to minimize the negative effects it had on her life. That's not my intention. My intention is merely to say that there are different ways of framing things, and it depends on the way that you want to view it. Again, that is kind of my tagline for this, is which way do you want to view the story? When she was sitting for it, the water was being heated up by an oil lamp, except it went out and John Everett didn't notice. And the water got progressively colder and colder and colder. Now, she could have said something. She could have spoke up, but she didn't. You could view that as she thought that she would lose the job and that people would be mad at her. Like, you could say it mirrors that type of oppression, right? That, worrying about losing this income, worrying about losing connections to the art world. Like, you could say it was that. And I think that is 100% fair and accurate. But I also think you could look at it as she chose to stay there because the work meant so much to her. But the question is, at what cost? And it's just another layer of Ophelia playing out through history. Just thinking about Taylor's life and seeing those connections and, you know, the way that she has suffered for her art. Again, not minimizing Elizabeth Siddal's plight, right? Because in case you didn't know, she ended up developing pneumonia, and the long-term effects of that ended up eroding her health and making her have issues with substances, and these things ultimately led to a pretty early death. It's not my intention to minimize that, and it's not my intention to put something of that onto what I'm talking about with Taylor. But do you see what I mean? Like, it's about how you frame it. Was she pushing herself too hard? Was she, you know, suffering in silence? Whether that be because of the potential risk to like income and all that, or because she was suffering because she believed in the art. No matter which way you look at it, it is tragic, but there are multiple ways to look at it. Now I kind of got ahead of myself here because obviously I need to actually talk about the original Ophelia, right? And in Shakespeare's play, Ophelia is a character that has always been endlessly fascinating to me, and one that I did get in trouble a couple of times. I did grow up in the South, and not everyone appreciates alternative perspectives. But I loved to have alternative perspectives. And I do remember being taught the more traditional view of Ophelia. And when I pushed back on those, not even knowing that there were more feminist perspectives of her story, I had no idea that that was a thing. But I got there and pushed on my own. And teachers didn't always like that. The way that Shakespeare explains her, and the fact that her father, Polonius, is the right hand of the king and is very aware of court matters and is very intelligent. You know, I always got the impression that she was a lot smarter than people were giving her credit for. And so it's like, you know, if he can pretend to be mad, why couldn't she? It was things like that. Ophelia is a very fascinating character because there are so many different ways to view it, beyond just the murkier details of her death. And I know a lot of Swifties have already talked about, you know, the whole 47 and trying to figure out where that fits into the grand scheme of things from an Easter egg perspective. And a lot of people have brought up the, you know, Act 4, Scene 7, and that's just when it's announced. That's interesting in of itself, because if you think about it, kind of going off about what I talked about in Rear Window, in the lenses that you view things, the audience doesn't get to see what actually happened. You only get someone else's perspective of what happened. Because of the nature of her death, there are endless ways of interpreting it. The first question I asked when I first read it was, if the queen saw this, and that is Hamlet's mother, if she saw this happen, why didn't she do anything? Why is she not portrayed soaking wet because she tried to help? Why is she not screaming out? And in some interpretations, maybe thought it was intentional, and because that would have been viewed poorly upon her, that she wouldn't have been able to be buried, for example, in like the church if it was intentional. Maybe she softened it for that. Or maybe she softened it because she thought that it would hurt Hamlet further. There are different ways of interpreting it. The other one is in one of the last, or it is the last, I can't remember off the top of my head, scenes where she's giving out her flowers. Shakespeare is known to use different flowers to represent certain things. And then if you take into consideration medicinal purposes, the one that she keeps for herself, Rue, in a medicinal way looked at as an abortive. So could she have been pregnant? And if she could have been, could the queen have pushed her because of them not being married? And if she thought she was mad, truly mad, and she didn't want that, could she have pushed her because she knew she was going to do it, and so she pushed it so the sin would not be upon her? There's so many different ways to view it. It's interesting to think about how there are so many different ways to view Taylor's work, but it's also interesting in the sense of the fact that we don't know what truly happened reminds me so much of the Reputation prologue. You know, like, you think you know someone, but you only know what you've seen. We never got to actually see what led to her ultimate demise. It's things like that that make this, as the opening track, endlessly fascinating to me. I also think it would be interesting to think about it connecting to the past versions of herself. You think about Folklore and Evermore, partially because of the pandemic, but also partially because of the wishes of her partner being kind of hidden away, trying not to be bejeweled, to not be the showgirl. This is just an outsider's perspective, but it kind of came across to me that she almost convinced herself that that is what she wanted, that she wanted that private, quiet life. And I think to a certain extent it was good for a while, but I think she convinced herself that she could be happy in that forever. Then you fast forward to the Eras tour, where she is getting to kind of live this high, to really be bejeweled again for the first time. and how that felt. I could see this being reflective of, had I stayed in this cage, had I stayed in this place, would my fate have been sealed? Is touring hard? Is being in the public eye hard? Yes, there's parts of it that I love. And then you think about her in TTPD, where she felt like she was going mad in this asylum. As she comes out the other side of that, if the song does end up being a rewriting the fate of Ophelia, that fate ended up being changed. It's like, I thought I was dying. TTPD was so fatalistic and hyperbolic and had mentions of different types of death. To come from that and then to go into Showgirl era, like, what a better way to highlight how your fate has changed. And it's another reason why I could really see that if TTPD was not planned, like I was saying earlier, I could see how so much of the foundation was being laid even in Midnights, because she was already feeling caged and trapped and all of those things. Like, that had been happening for years, right? So laying down these pieces where she's in her lavender haze, basically staying in this madness of like, no, I could be comfortable here, and having these images that do look very Fate of Ophelia, and then thinking the next album could be what she was envisioning as Showgirl. I feel like this is a concept she could have come up with a long time ago and was referencing in multiple different ways, whether that be Reputation, whether that be Midnights, whether that be, you know, I just think there's a lot of instances where that could be something she'd been sitting on, thinking about herself in that way. There's also someone on TikTok that had brought this up, Hannah, I just can't remember it, something 22 is the username. She had theorized that But Daddy I Love Him could also be from the perspective of Ophelia. And that is an interesting way to think about it, because if you go back and listen to that song, it makes a lot of sense. It does bring an interesting narrative into the fate of Ophelia and what that means for potential layers directed at toxic fans, haters, you know, that sort of thing. I also think it's interesting when you think about some of the next tracks, for example, Father Figure. I did also want to talk about Cardiff. So earlier when I talked about the places where she was wearing orange and a bug flew in her mouth, and Cardiff was talked about in the podcast when they were talking about the mop cart, because in the mop cart there was a picture of Cardiff. I hope I'm saying that right. If I'm botching it, I'm so sorry. I'm really bad at pronouncing things. And in the mashups, she sang I Hate It Here and The Lakes. And like one part, for example, was take me to the lakes, I hate it here, so take me to the lakes where all the poets went to die. I don't belong, my beloved, and neither do you. Those Windermere Peaks look like a perfect place to cry. I'm setting off, but not without my muse, not without you. And you just think about the lakes, and I hate it here, and thinking about how much she was escaping into her own mind. Connecting that with Ophelia is just so interesting. Like, I could quite literally talk about this for 2 hours, but the last things I want to talk about is just connections in general to maybe just keep in mind if you're looking for different ways to interpret the song. We're going off the assumption here that I'm right, that alternate meanings as well, because of the picture being two Taylors from Taylor Nation. So, you know, maybe it won't be. Maybe it will be just one of these and it won't be a Travis thing, but that's like one of the ways I could see it being like the two thing. So we're going off that assumption. Like, the rest of this video is literally me leaning so hard into that idea. These are my predictions. Take it for what you will. It's also one of the most romanticized deaths. And I do think that's an interesting thing when you connect it with like Cleopatra. And if you connect it with like Elizabeth Taylor portraying that, that is also an interesting connection. Gertrude's description is climbs on a willow tree overhanging a brook to dangle some from its branches, and a bough breaks, balancing on breaking branches, if you will. Beneath her, she lies in the water, singing songs as if unaware of her danger. She's not distressed, she doesn't see what's coming for her. Her clothes, trapping air, have allowed her to temporarily stay afloat, but eventually her garments, heavy with their drink, pulled the poor wretch from her melodious lay down to muddied death. Also, things that came to mind when thinking about this was, you know, my beloved ghost of me sitting in a tree, DYING, from How Did It End? And then, like I said, balancing on breaking branches from Exiled. I also just think about TTPD, I Can Do It With a Broken Heart, and just thinking about how Ophelia has been one of the most romanticized deaths. And whole speech from Queen Gertrude is looked at as like one of the most beautifully like haunting descriptions of a death. Any tragedy or any pain and suffering that Taylor experiences is always minimized, right? Like, it's always as if she's not allowed to have emotions. And then you think about like TTPD and people's responses to that. We talked about this earlier with the optical illusion, and how when the acoustic set ended and the piano had all of those hand-painted flowers that look remarkably similar to the John Everett painting, she gets up from that and then goes and dives into the water. The last thing on this, and then I swear we'll move on. This and Elizabeth Taylor will be the longest. The rest of them will be very quick, I promise. I've been very interested in the bolter, as I said earlier, when Hamlet basically tells Ophelia, you were nothing, like, we weren't serious, essentially. He says, get thee to a nunnery, which is essentially calling her like a whore. And obviously, slut-shaming is something that's followed Taylor her whole career. But when you think about it in the context of the bolter, by all accounts, she almost drowned when she was 6 in frigid water. And I can confirm she made a curious child, ever reviled by everyone except her own father, with a quite bewitching face, splendidly selfish, charmingly helpless. If that doesn't give some Ophelia. And then later on it says, you know, watching him jump, then pulling him under, and at first blush, this is fate. Ended with the slam of a door, then he'll call her a whore. Wish he wouldn't be so sore, but as she was leaving, it felt like breathing. And then all her fucking lives flashed before her eyes, and she realized it feels like the time she fell through the ice and then came out alive. So she almost drowned, but she didn't. Just feel like there's gonna be some connections that could be made there. Okay, let's talk about Elizabeth Taylor. I love Elizabeth Taylor. I've always loved Elizabeth Taylor. When the Elizabeth Taylor Lost tapes came out, I watched it, and then I recently rewatched it after I found out about this track, so I could kind of like re-get quotes and stuff. Now, the first thing we need to talk about is the whole Violet thing. I know there's a lot of people who think that there could be a hidden track called Violet, and while I would absolutely love for that to be true, I just personally can't see that being the case. I think it's more likely that maybe the reason she named it that was because it's gonna be a lyric, but specifically why she didn't call it, you know, Elizabeth Taylor type keychain was, I think it would be more to do with like a potential lawsuit. I'm obviously not an expert on this matter by any means, but my assumption is that it would be very different than, you know, paying homage in a song is one thing, especially because there was a big case, Barbie Mattel. It was Mattel Inc. v. MCA Records Incorporated, and that case basically was over the Barbie Girl song. It went all the way up to the Supreme Court, who actually chose not to see the case, which means the lower court's decision stands. So MCA did win that case. If it's in a song, it's easier. If it's merchandise that you're selling, I could see that being different. There are so many connections between Taylor and Elizabeth Taylor, but you know, knowing her story and how people minimized her talent, her intelligence, I can't imagine this only being like a love song, even though Elizabeth Taylor was known for her husbands and being a self-proclaimed romance addict. I still just don't see it not including something about fame, the industry, minimizing talent or business prowess, whether that be surface level or whether that be you have to look deeper for that. Who knows? But I would be very shocked if it was only a love song. I just can't see Taylor only talking about that in regard to Elizabeth Taylor, who's known to be very witty and funny. She was also very intelligent and became a badass business person. She was the first person of any gender to secure a contract for $1 million for a role. But on top of that, she negotiated to have 10% of the absolute gross. When it came to business, people would claim that she was ruthless. The comparison to, you know, Taylor being always labeled as like calculated. She was with MGM, and when she did finally get to leave MGM, she was one of the first people who started negotiating her deals directly with the studios instead of being attached to a studio. And that was something she really enjoyed. She started really young. She was 10 years old when she went to visit, I'm going to be reading off notes, so bear with me here, because there's a lot of quotes. The Warner Brothers studio with her parents at 10, and she was basically transported. Her only desire was to be an actress. Her mother was a former actress, was dead set on her not doing it. After her debut in Lassie Come Home, studied for 3 hours a day at MGM's studio school, then went to the set for 8 hours of acting. She was known to be very, very determined and really high work ethic. You can see that in one of the earliest examples was she really wanted a role in National Velvet to be playing the character of a horse racing jockey. She obsessively stretched every day because they said she was too small for the role. She ended up growing 3 inches because she pushed herself. The director was so impressed by her tenacity that he gave her the role. She was so naive when she was young. She went along with all these PR fake relationships, and when MGM pushed her into her first marriage with the hotel heir Conrad Hilton Jr., she went with it. The wedding video footage, when I saw it for the first time, like, I thought it was from a movie. I mean, it was sensationalized. Elizabeth thought that that was going to be her key to adulthood and unlocking freedom. She said she thought thought she would suddenly mature, essentially be able to make her own decisions and have some agency. She had to fight against MGM so hard because they always wanted her to play the role of the ingenue. It was always an uphill battle. The first role she would classify as an adult would be A Place in the Sun. She said, I loved the possibility of acting. I took it between my teeth like a horse does and I ran, and it seemed to work. She said, and I felt very much like the inadequate teenage Hollywood sort of puppet that had just worn pretty close and hadn't really acted except with horses and dogs. In this, it was the interview tapes, and they were the lost tapes, so they were never publicized, so no one ever heard these. The person who was interviewing her was someone who she would consider to be more of a friend. She was more forthcoming in this. Interviewer asked what color her eyes were, and she said, I would say dark blue. And the interview said, not violet, and she goes, ugh, journalists romanticizing of me. Interesting when we talk about like the perspectives and the way people are viewed, and you think you know someone. The wedding was wonderful, but then it became a disillusionment. Also, a few split lips. At one point, he kicked her in the stomach so hard that he caused her to miscarry. That was her first husband. After she got away from her first husband, she stayed at the Plaza Hotel in New York City at 19. It was her first taste of freedom. She surrounded herself with gay men like Monty Clift and Rock Hudson because they were the only people who made her feel safe. Second marriage, she said, was like a, quote, father figure thing. A great stabilizer. Michael Wilding was British, whom she had her first child with at 20 years old, hated the roles that MGM would give her. He was given such shit that you should choke on it, and that kind of made me sick. I died inside because year after year of reading reviews that said I was a Bacchus pretty face that quite clearly couldn't read a line upside down. A kind of rebellion had started within me. I thought maybe I'd start to fight, and then I did start to fight. Roles that really started pushing that, which was Giant. On the set of Giant is when she became really close with James Dean. One night, Dean revealed many personal secrets to her and felt so vulnerable about exposing himself that he wouldn't talk to her for a few days afterwards. She had actually been in the passenger seat of Dean's Porsche earlier in the day before he fatally crashed that car. Dean's death caused her a period of deep introspection, which ultimately led to her divorcing her second husband, who, by the way, was 20 years her senior. She was also very adamant that her children had it as normal of a childhood as possible. The interviewer brought up her children and she said, I absolutely cannot talk about them. I feel terribly protective. They have a right to privacy. A friend was interviewed and she said, you know, she never had all these boyfriends. You know, she was known for having, 7 husbands, 8 marriages. She said she fell in love and then she got married, then got divorced. And once I said to her, why do you have to marry all these fellows? Why can't you just be a mistress or just date them? And she said, because I want to be a bride. And then came the love of her life. Mike Todd, was a Broadway producer. Then he got into films, his first one being Around the World in 80 Days. Mike was one of the most flamboyant characters I've ever known. There was a joy about being alive and vitality. He was a real con artist. He could come to go about your teeth, which essentially means to deal with something or get involved with something with great energy and enthusiasm. Essentially, he was extremely charismatic. At one point, he ends up calling her into MGM and he charges in, he sits down, and he starts laying out an entire spiel, is how she describes it, about all the ways that he loved her and that there was just no question about it and that they ought to be married already. And he just kept going on. And she said, I just sat there. Finally, I looked at him and I said, I think you might be right. And that's when she married her third husband. Minnie said it was the love of her life. Their friends had all said like it was the happiest they'd ever seen them, which Elizabeth and Mike had also confirmed. They had both begun to get a bit wary because their marriage was too good to be true. And this would unfortunately prove to be right. Elizabeth was struck with a cold and she ended up not traveling with Todd on his private plane, which was called the Liz, when it ended up crashing and killed him and 3 others on board. She also talks about when she was really young, she had a chaperone or her mother with her at all times. She was never left alone. She said, in some ways that was great because I was really protected. But she said in other ways, I was so sheltered and I genuinely did not understand being an adult, which is how she kind of got into her first marriage and all of that. She was looking more at the freedom aspect of being an adult and feeling like she would have it all worked out. And that was a big part to play. But anyway, she said she was unprepared and it was more than she could handle. And she kind of didn't handle the trauma after he died. She went back to work 2 weeks later because she said she just needed to finish that movie. She just needed to get it over with. She said she basically was living her life through Maggie, which was the role that she was playing. And while she was acting, she said she could function and feel normal. But then as soon as they hit cut, go back to being dead again. Felt like she was in a trance, and she said she had the urge to just lie down and quit. But she said that she kept thinking, I know I'm headed somewhere really bad, being pulled into trouble. She felt like she couldn't stop it. No matter how much she tried to make herself stay on a straight and narrow, she just couldn't. She just knew she was spiraling, which led to her first cheating scandal, which was with Eddie Fisher, who was best friends with her late husband, who she had just lost, and she had also become kind of besties with his wife as well. She liked him, but she never loved him. She only liked talking to him about Mike because she felt like his memory was still alive when they would talk about him. She felt like that was her only connection to him. Debbie Reynolds, who was his wife at the time, when the cheating scandal broke out, Debbie really leaned into the being shocked narrative to the public. I had no idea, we were so happily married, everything was perfect, this came out of nowhere. And Elizabeth said that wasn't true. Mike and her had been made aware and witnessed that there was a ton of problems already. She basically went on to say, like, I'm not saying I didn't do anything wrong. I'm just saying that framing it that way only added to all of the chaos, and it wasn't even true. She said a happy, stable marriage was in fact not happening. They were already in turmoil, but obviously the public didn't know that, so it vilified Elizabeth more. She said she knew it was a mistake before she even married him. She said she doesn't even remember most of the marriage because she was such a shell of a human at that point, and she was just trying not to give up on life. She was asked whether she thought at the time if it would have been marvelous if she had never been a movie star, never been so successful. And she said, oh yes, I think a part of me was sorry that I became basically a public utility. I know I should be grateful. I know all that, but I don't like fame. I don't like it in the sense of belonging to the public and not feeling like me. I like being an actress or trying to be. Everyone advised me not to do it because the theme was so controversial, but Elizabeth was never afraid of controversial things. Suddenly last summer dealt with a troubled gay man who was deeply closeted. Now, of course, because of the production code at the time, the underlying homosexuality, it was very whitewashed, but people said, don't do it. It'll be the end of your career. And she actually got nominated for an Oscar, but she didn't win. You really want the awards. You want the Academy recognition. And she said, sure, I do. And he said, what does it represent? And she said, well, I suppose to me, it means being considered by my own industry as an actress, not as a movie star. And that was terribly important to me. And I do think that's interesting when we think about how Taylor has always been about the critical acclaim. I've always said, like, I've never really gotten the impression that it was really about fame. It was about the recognition of people who she respected and her peers that made her feel like she was good enough. Thought that was a good, interesting parallel. I'm just saying parallels in the types of situations, not necessarily on how they responded to the situation. I just want to make that clear. Being married to Eddie, it seemed like you were very lonely. Was that right? She said yes, and he made sure that I felt lonely. We never went out. It was like he didn't like me being with other people or being out with me. It was like being locked up. I started sleeping 14 to 15 hours at once. I tried avoiding everything. I was trying to just avoid life. I was so desperate that at one time I did take some sleeping pills. I did it deliberately, calmly, and I did it in front of Eddie. I was fed up with living. I couldn't face the thought of divorce. I'd rather been dead than face going through divorce publicly again. Interviewer, did you go to the hospital? She said, no, a doctor came to the hotel, and thank God, I'm so deeply ashamed. And she goes on to talk about afterwards, all she could think about were the consequences to her children and how she felt so selfish that, you know, of what she would have left her kids with. Her words, not mine. But in that moment, all she was thinking about was basically her own pain. It goes on to talk about like her struggles with MGM, roles that they were making her play, one particular film that she really didn't want to do. And she said, I hated it so much. I thought, fuck them. They made me do the film. I didn't want it. I did it with a pistol to my head. She said, I tried to do it. I mean, the lines were just so diabolical. It was a piece of shit and it made me angry. The anger, it kind of gave me an incentive. Interviewer, that character is one of the most potent things I've seen you play. So tragic and wild and fascinating. She said, well, it was done out of anger. Just the way she said it was iconic. This isn't necessarily in chronological order anymore because it's just my notes, but at one point a director whom she'd previously been in a good relationship called her out in front of everyone. This is a quote. She would never be a serious actress because she was too concerned with being pretty. He constantly reminded me that I was a movie star and not an actress. He constantly misinterpreted the ideas of mine that did not gel of his. And she goes on to talk about, like, he basically said that in front of everyone that she was worried about being pretty when it was actually that they had gotten in a fight over her trying to explain what she thought would be better for the character and to express how she wanted to play the character, and he didn't like it, so he called her out in front of everyone, acting like it was just about her looks. The interviewer said, had you ever taken acting lessons? She said, no, I believe that any technique or talent that I might have had is not a technique, it's instinct. Saying I sweat, real sweat, and I shake, real shakes. A great deal of effort goes into making it seem effortless. A little fast forward, Elizabeth Taylor having this huge commercial success with her fragrance lines. In 1987, she launched her first one, which was called Passion. Today, there are 16 different scents, including the arguably most famous one, which is called White Diamonds. She also ended up having a Violet Eyes fragrance as well. And fun fact, I never thought it was called White Diamonds until doing this research, because for some reason I had it in my head that it was called Diamonds Are Forever. And then I figured out that I think it's because in the commercial for White Diamonds, that is the song that always played. And I think that's where I got it. That's neither here nor there. But the film of Cleopatra took like years to film. She ended up getting pneumonia on set and almost died. She had all these health struggles, very drawn out, and all of this stuff. It was a mess. Had previously met Richard Burton. He was playing obviously her love interest. She had already felt like she didn't like him. He had made more misogynistic comments and about her and her looks and her boobs and, you know, all this stuff. He ended up coming to set and he was extremely hungover. And she basically said that she felt like bad for him, how much he was struggling. And it kind of like endeared him to her. But he was known for being kind of a playboy. So she had originally been like, no, staying away from you. But as fate would have it. And mind you, both of them are still married at this point. They end up having an affair on set, and this turns into like this global sensationalized scandal. The Vatican denounced Elizabeth Taylor. Pretty sure they didn't denounce him though, which, like, can we talk about that? But that's neither here nor there. During what he had named Le Scandal, he ended up proposing to her on a wisteria, the lakes, anyone? A wisteria-clad terrace at a hotel in Portofino, Italy. My assumption, Portofino vinyl, that is an Easter egg for something connected to Elizabeth Taylor, the song, because of that connection with the whole Portofino, Italy thing. And they had gone there to basically run away from the drama. The idea of paparazzi really became popularized with Elizabeth Taylor. And given how much paparazzi and the media hype plagued Taylor's career, arguably being one of the most famous women ever, especially because of social media and the grand scale, there's obviously a ton of connections that could be made between her and Elizabeth Taylor. I did just want to read this one quote that was about someone describing Elizabeth Taylor, and it said, "A self-confessed romance addict, Taylor was the ultimate Hollywood movie star. Her tumultuous life off screen was often more fascinating than the character she played on screen." Especially I think about certain times of Taylor's career where they cared so much more about who she was dating than about her actual art. Her epic diamond-filled romances with Richard Burton and Mike Todd dominated newspaper headlines around the world for 3 decades, and her sexy globe-trotting lifestyle has provided a tantalizing blueprint for amorous couples in search of their own starry-eyed passion ever since. Now let's talk a little bit more about Taylor connections. So the first time I can remember Elizabeth Taylor being brought up in connection with Taylor is actually not in Are You Ready For It, when she says, "He can be my jailer, Burton to this Taylor." It was actually in a statement regarding a controversy surrounding the Wildest Dreams music video. In case you weren't aware, after the music video came out, there were people who accused her of being racist, quote, not including people of color, and feeding into the stereotypes surrounding Africa, because the music video portrayed a 50s-based love story while the actors fall in love filming on a movie set in Africa, only to then return to Hollywood for the premiere to be faced with the co-star and his wife on the red carpet. And she ends up running out of the premiere. She ran out of the theater. Just throwing that out there. Even before the controversy though, Taylor had already decided and included this information at the very end of the video that all of the video's proceeds were being donated, as she does with a lot of her music videos. That's not new. This time it was to the African Parks Foundation. When all the controversies was coming around, Joseph Kahn, who was the music video's director, actually issued a statement regarding the video, and this is the quote. "Wildest Dreams is a song about a relationship that was doomed, and the music video concept was that they were having a love affair on location away from their normal lives. This is not a video about colonialism, but a love story on the set of a period film crew in Africa in 1950. There are Black Africans in the video in a number of shots, but I rarely cut to crew faces outside of the director, as the vast majority of screen time is Taylor and Scott, who is playing the love interest. The video is based on classic Hollywood romances like Elizabeth Taylor and Richard Burton, as well as classic movies like The African Queen, Out of Africa, and The English Patient, to name a few. The reality is not only were there people of color in the video, but the key creatives who worked on this video are people of color. I am an Asian," this is a quote, "I am an Asian American. The producer, Jill Harden, is an African American woman, and the editor, Chancellor Hayes, is an African American man. We cast and edited this video. We collectively decided it would have been historically inaccurate to load the crew with more Black actors, as the video would have then been accused of rewriting history. This video is set in the past by a crew set in the present, and we are proud of our work. There is no political agenda in this video. Our only goal was to tell a tragic love story in classic Hollywood iconograph. Furthermore, this video has been singled out, yet there have been many music videos depicting Africa. These videos have traditionally not been lessons in African history. Let's not forget Taylor has chosen to donate all of her proceeds from this video to the African Parks Foundation to preserve the endangered animals of the continent and support the economies of local African people. I just wanted to bring that up because I remembered that coming out, and I remembered the first time I saw that music video thinking about, oh my god, this is Elizabeth Taylor. Just the look was Elizabeth Taylor. So I just wanted to point that out, that that was the first connection that I could think of. Now, there is another example that you could cite if you really wanted to take it further, considering that Elizabeth's most famous role was Cleopatra, more Egyptian Cleopatra looking eye as the keychain. One could make a case that a connection to Cleopatra could also be a connection to Elizabeth Taylor. And if you wanted to go that route, you could bring up the Speak Now vault track, When Emma Falls in Love, because there is a lyric in there that does say, if Cleopatra grew up in a small town. I don't think I would probably consider that, but I just figured I'd throw it out there. Now, circling back to the whole Burton to this Taylor, you do have to wonder if the re-recordings project had a part to play in the creation of this song. Maybe it sparked inspiration for this song. If so, I could envision a world where basically she learns from past relationships. Because, okay, while I have always loved that lyric, like when I listened to Ready for It, I love the way it sounded, but there's always been a part of me that cringes a little bit just knowing Elizabeth Taylor's stories and the realities of that particular relationship. This is another one of those kind of weird Tay voodoo moments, because Richard Burton was known to be, he was a little jealous of her success and fame, hence why he didn't always handle her fame well. Burton had established himself a formidable Shakespearean actor in the 1950s on the theater stage. Also just wanted to note that in 1964 he gave a pretty highly praised performance playing Hamlet. Just throwing that out there. In 1952 is when he transitioned theater to Hollywood, but it wasn't until the mid 1960s that he really became a top box office star. Another fun fact is the voiceover that played when they aired on TV Elizabeth signing her Cleopatra contract. It said this: Cleopatra, of whom Shakespeare wrote, age cannot weather her, nor custom stall her infinite variety. Reinvention. Gonna get back to that. Timeless, interesting. It's almost immortalized. And I do think that's interesting when you think about honey. We'll get there. Lastly, just wanted to read y'all this about Elizabeth Taylor and Richard Burton's An Epic Romance. It says, no relationship is perfect. Elizabeth Taylor and Richard Burton were certainly no exception. What made their connection so evocative was their acceptance of each other and, more importantly, their distinct brand of love. Amid the jewels, scandals, and screaming matches, Elizabeth and Richard shared a love that was as passionate as it was tumultuous. Elizabeth was known to live her life with a fever that remains unmatched, therefore we can expect no less from her and the man she considered one of her two greatest loves. And there's a quote that says, when you are in love and lust like that, you just grab it with both hands and ride out the storm. Like all great love stories, this one began with apathy. The first time they saw each other, Richard was enamored by Elizabeth's unquestionable beauty. And it goes on to talk about how Elizabeth, on the other hand, had no intention of returning the sentiment until their fates crossed again 9 years later on the set of Cleopatra. Their sizzling chemistry on camera wasn't just acting. They shared their first kiss on film and continued the moment even after the director called cut. Sparks flew, spouses were forgotten, and later that day, Richard dragged his chair next to Elizabeth, where it would remain for 13 years. 13. The affair that began behind the scenes of Cleopatra soon took over the world. Their extravagant spending, epic battles, and obsessive relationship caused a splash that would follow the couple for the entirety of their time together and beyond. I'm just saying, it's interesting parallels with these relationships. You got a jailer, the one that didn't want her to go anywhere, and now you've got this one that was a roller coaster ride. I'm just saying. The Burtons were notorious for their performative fights in both private and public. Richard loses his temper with true enjoyment. It's beautiful to watch. Elizabeth once said, quote, our fights are delightful screaming matches, and Richard is rather like a small atomic bomb going off. What was once exhilarating vocal exercises quickly began brutal confrontations, heightened by alcohol and jealousy. Elizabeth struggled with addiction mixed with Richard's alcoholism, and infidelity eventually took its toll on the iconic couple. In 1974, they divorced, only to remarry in 1975, and then they got divorced again less than a year later. Quote, this was Elizabeth. I don't want to be that much in love ever again. I gave everything away. My soul, my being, everything. They would remain in contact throughout the years, never quite able to leave each other alone. Dramatic as it was, they shared a love that was deep and fierce, the kind that can be beautiful even in its destruction. You have to wonder, did the re-recordings process make her think about the parallels with Elizabeth Taylor perhaps? Regardless, it is a little Tay voodoo to think about how she almost kind of prophesized how that relationship would ultimately kind of end, of the "you could be my jailer" Burton to this Taylor, and how that relationship did end up feeling kind of like jail and being caged. I know I made a comparison to different things a minute ago, but I will say the one thing that was kind of interesting was just that fame aspect really coming into play and kind of feeling like it was overshadowing his own talent and things like that. Is there's just interesting parallels there, and I do think love will be a part of it, simply because, to quote Rosalie Hale from Clips, I think that was a Clips, right? Yeah, I was young and I was in love with the idea of love. And that is very Elizabeth Taylor coded as well. So I do think there will be a love aspect. It's just, I would be shocked if there was not more to it. This is so long. I'm going to try to rapid fire go through the rest of these because those were the ones that I think were going to take the longest. Okay, so let's talk about opalite. Surface level, I think just the fact that opal is Travis's birthstone, I feel like there's going to be a connection there. The moment she said lightning in a bottle, I remember thinking immediately the prophecy. So after I got off live, I had wrote down in my notes, album prediction, is she redoing her prophecy? She has to feel on top of the world, and sometimes when you come out of the fog, you realize, wait, I am a badass and I'm about to make my own damn destiny. Wish list, question mark? That is what I had listed. So in my head, the lightning in a bottle thing was in connection to wish list, is what I was kind of thinking. Maybe instead of the change the prophecy, maybe she was like, I'm gonna make my own damn wish list of like the things I want. I'm gonna change my own fate kind of thing. And then that made me think of the fate of Ophelia, and I went in a spiral, right? Like that was night one. But considering that the bracelet has an opalite star charm and lightning bolt, I'm assuming that that is going to be connected to this song. Opalite is the trade name for the synthetic like opalescent glass. I originally thought that maybe it was going to be like a manufactured version, so maybe a commentary about how when people see her, it's a facade, that she's, again, you only see what someone tells you you see. Like that's what I was thinking originally, but then when it got into the whole opal and his birthstone, I think it is going to be like a Travis thing. Maybe a deeper meaning could be that though. But I also could see it, knowing that it's a imitation thing, I'm thinking it's more going to be like my past loves weren't real and this is real kind of thing. Have opalite like right here. Ironically in a moon shape. I know it's not stars, but close. Oh, I know what else. Side note, this is like random, but I did just also want to put on here, because we've been trying to figure out like where Pinocchio might fit into this. Not only the Pinocchio statue in the podcast, but also with Sabrina having that. I did put on here, Jiminy Cricket sings When You Wish Upon a Star. I'm just looking for things, Let's move on to father figure. All right, listen. These next two songs, whichever way one goes, the other one is going to be impacted, because I got two theories. The first one is, when it said father figure, the first one I thought of was Scott Borchetta. And if it is Scott Borchetta, then I could see it being like Scott Borchetta is like the person she's working through, but it's bigger about industry at large. In the picture from Taylor Nation, she is sitting in the man jacket and all that with her legs up. I could still see that being like father figure, meaning like I'm the boss kind of thing, but I could also see it as like maybe she's saying she's the man running things, so kind of be like this album's version of the man. And if you go down that route, we talk about Tay daughter in the fandom, a lot of the younger girls and women who are coming up that have been inspired by Taylor and are songwriters. Maybe she's saying she's the father figure trying to make changes in the industry for those Tay daughters kind of thing. But I could also see it being like the Scott Borchetta thing, because I do feel like that is father figure. So when I first heard it, I immediately thought of that. I just feel like that would make sense to me. I've seen people talk about this and saying, this is about her life behind the stage, like it's not going to be about that. But I'm like, but yeah, but like just because the showgirl comes off the stage, I would argue that talking about the industry and the stuff that goes on behind the scenes has a higher chance of being in this album, because that is a part of the showgirl's life that she has to deal with. But we'll see. There was one other thing, though, that I wanted to point out that I thought could be like a potential perspective here. When a woman does something that people don't like, or like in particular, like potentially a man doesn't like, a lot of times they'll be like, where was your father figure? Or like the daddy issues type thing. It's used when you're talking about like slut shaming. I thought that was an interesting thing that could be a thread there, even though that doesn't apply to Taylor. I think this is less likely, but I just figured I'd mention it because it is something that gets said, like lack of father figure. Also a potential thread to think about is the Pinocchio. Like Pinocchio didn't technically have a father. He had a father figure essentially. Track 5 is eldest daughter. real excited for this one. When I first heard that that was a title, all I could think of is My Bare Hands Paved Their Path, Who's Afraid of Little Me, which is why my first thought was, oh, it's not Tay daughters, it's Tay sisters, meaning like she's the eldest daughter who's like trying to pave the way, protect her younger sisters, the younger showgirls, if you will. If Taylor ends up being father figure, then I would assume that eldest daughter is to the eldest daughters who feel like the world's being placed upon their shoulders. So like those showgirls, for example, these are her lessons she's imparting to those daughters who feel like everything's on them. I could definitely see that. I'm leaning more towards the industry or Scott Borchetta being father figure, and then this being her being the eldest daughter and having the weight on her shoulders, the weight of like forging a new path and trying to protect the younger ones kind of thing. That's what I'm leaning more towards. Moving on to ruin the friendship. If it is about friendship, like actually about friendship and not like ruin the friendship because I want to like be with you kind of thing. And if we go with the whole like lessons for the showgirls kind of thing, like what I've learned now that I've kind of hit the top, I could see it being like how fame and public scrutiny can impact friendships and to like not let those things ruin your friendships. I could see it being that. I think back to when, I don't even remember when, she talked about, was that, maybe it was in Miss Americana or an interview or something. She talked about like, she tries not to let the elephant in the room, aka her fame, impact the people around her, maintain a sense of normalcy. So I could see that maybe being a lesson, especially because she brought up in the podcast about how she has friends who get really impacted by the external world. And so I could maybe see something like that. But I don't know, maybe it's, I don't know. I get the sense that it's going to be romantic, but I also know that that doesn't necessarily fit with the whole Travis things. I don't know what it is that makes me think that it might not be that it might be more like actually actually romantic, actually be about a romantic relationship. Maybe it's just because the picture from Taylor Nation was like the Lover bodysuit. I mean, it's not like the Lover album doesn't have songs about friendship and family and all of that, so I don't know, maybe it's just vibes. But moving on to actually romantic. So when I heard the title, my first thought was it's actually romantic, which makes me think that this is going to be talking about something that the average person wouldn't think is romantic, which I feel like could be approached in a lot of different ways. I saw someone talk about how in the podcast, she talked about actually getting to surprise fans, considering that actually romantic is the locket that is associated with the It's Rapturous CD. That would be an interesting connection back to the Times article talking about the fans and how it was rapturous. But the only thing I have an issue if going that route would be the locket is a Valentine's Day envelope. I don't know, that might be leaning a little too much into like a connotation of like parasocial. I don't know. I mean, if anybody could do it, it would be her. You know, maybe it could be a love letter to herself or a Travis type song where it's like all the ways that he's made her feel loved that a lot of people may take for granted because they aren't a showgirl, you know, but for a showgirl, these things are romantic. However, there's just one thing, and maybe I'm just too hung up on something that is not even a part of this, and that's totally fair. But when I think about the actual cover of It's Rapturous, that is like one of the most distinct callbacks to Reputation. Like the pose. First time I saw it, I was like, Reputation. I mean, I guess Reputation technically, it's got that love story woven into it. But I don't know. But then I also think about the other narrative of Reputation, and I'm like, okay, well, could it be like it's actually this romantic that you spend this much time like hating me kind of thing? That could tie into the thought of the lessons for showgirls, and also it could tie into if we do think about this kind of being a full circle moment and how I talked about earlier with Reputation about, you know, maybe rewriting certain narratives. So instead of like lashing out, maybe she's like learned that it's like, well, they're gonna talk about you either way kind of thing. Lessons of a showgirl, you know, I don't know. I just don't know. There's so many ways I could see this song going. Next up, Wishlist. I talked about this earlier that like my first thought was prophecy. I still am kind of like, I don't know, I'm still kind of like hooked on that. Because you think about like the money signs and her saying like in the prophecy, I don't want money, I just want someone who wants my company. I don't know, maybe. I was also thinking about the whole full circle moment on this one too, and about the lessons to the showgirls. Maybe it could be her like deciding that she's gonna change her own fate from the prophecy. And I put on here like perhaps realizing that the relationship she's in is different than anything she's ever experienced, and, you know, seeing the success of the Eras tour and the re-recordings and all that. Maybe she started seeing a shot at getting her masters back. And so, like, I know the timeline wouldn't fit to where the masters would have been secured, but again, going back to what I said earlier, like, if she was thinking, no, this is coming, maybe it was her kind of like manifesting. Maybe she wrote it when she didn't know if she was going to get them back, but she decided to include it when she actually got them back. I don't know. I'm just really hung up on like the masters thing in regards to wish list. Who knows? What do you mean? Like what do you mean? There's so many possibilities for this. It's not even funny. The puppet thing, the Pinocchio of it all, like I could see that, like a wooden puppet. I think I hope I'm saying that right. I think Britton Ray said something about like, you know, her story coming back to life, but realizing that she's real and she's always been real, even though the life of the showgirl sometimes makes you feel like you're not human. And that would be an interesting commentary, especially with how she behaved on the podcast. Like I could see that. Then you think about the CDs and everything just keeps going back to the CDs for me. The CDs is a heart with an arrow through it. Is it an arrow? Are we shooting our target? Like, I don't know. And I'm also wondering if it's going to be like a play on different types of like different things. Like I would have done this, knock on wood, wooden something, you know. I also just the sexual innuendo. I think that would be funny, especially because it is the heart thing. I don't know that I can see a song where she would do that. But then again, it's the showgirl talking. I still just can't picture it. Like, I would love it. I think it would be iconic. I just can't see a world where that happens. However, there is one other thing that I do need to bring up. In the British Vogue poem that she wrote is in the If You're Anything Like Me, she mentions knocking on wood. She also says frightful and scares you. And this CD that the wood charm thing is connected to is the It's Frightening edition. Also, it says, will feel the empty seats. And it's feel as in F-E-E-L, will feel the empty seats. The cover, empty seats in a theater. It also talks about lock your door, secret garden gate, the locks, the keys, all of that. It makes me think about on her Instagram post when they got engaged. I literally made a TikTok about this. I was like, oh my God, he's gonna get a key to the garden. And she looks like she's in a garden, like the garden inside my mind. The keys and locks thing being such a prevalent theme in this whole thing, and then you have keys and locks here, lock your door, secret garden gate, scares you, fears. And then there's also stripped you of your shiny paint. And then it also says, darling, later on you will thank your lucky stars for that frightful day. Like, thank your stars. Like, you know what I'm saying here? So I don't know. I do feel like this is going to be a song, just given that I've seen so many connections with like the poem, I could see it being a song that definitely plays into my theory of like surface level says something, but there's a lot more to it. You want to write it off as something, but it's not. I don't know. Watch it be this like really in-depth song, and I'm like, maybe it's knock on wood. I don't know. Canceled. There are so many ways this could go. We don't have the time. The first note I wrote when I heard the title was evolved narrative from Cassandra, but in the reclaiming of her power. So maybe the showgirls like, bitch, we're at the top of it, and just try to cancel us. Like, I don't even, I don't know. I could see that. I have on here teaching other showgirls the ropes. Like, that's show business. Like, fake it till you make it. They're going to say bad press. They're going to try to cancel you. That's just a part of it. I could also see that if we're talking about re-changing the narrative and all the lessons that she's learned, I could see it as a evolved albatross where it's like, listen, like your association with me is probably going to get you canceled. But like, I'm here to dance with you kind of thing. Do you see like albatross, but make it showgirl? I don't know. Next one is honey. The first thing I thought of was the whole like doesn't expire kind of thing, almost like being immortal. And that made me think of the whole Cleopatra, Elizabeth Taylor of it all. So I could see that. I could also see that as like a honey trap. Also, I'm from the South, and like the amount of people who call you honey and darling and all of those things, the amount of kind of creepy people that will call you that, I I don't know. Also the Sweet Like Honey, Karma. I think you could go a lot of ways with this one. I don't know which way she's gonna go, to be honest. And then the last one, The Life of a Showgirl. I don't have any thoughts other than what I said at the beginning, which again, we're making so many assumptions here. Okay. The Showgirl's version of these are the lessons I've learned, showing the full circle of like how much growth she's had and how like things don't get under her skin as much and she's not second guessing herself as much, trusting herself more, seeing this like real big height and she's reclaiming power. I think there's also something to be said about the fact that like the visuals for this album, she's showing the most skin she's ever done in her 30s. When the industry wants to put people in the elephant graveyard, like she said in Miss Americana, this is the time that she's like, no, I'm actually on top and I'm in my 30s. I can't really see the life of a showgirl other than like telling Sabrina, the younger showgirl, this is the life of a showgirl. That's all I got. I don't really know any other way you could take it. Believe it to Taylor. I mean, the woman is mastermind and I quite frankly know nothing in comparison. So, who really knows? Last thing I did want to say, because I don't know if I said it earlier, and in case I didn't, I want to have it in this video. When we talked about father figure, if father figure does end up being industry, I do think there could be an interesting layer to the fate of Ophelia if the father in this scenario, like I talked about in the whole "but daddy I love him" connection, industry could be the dad that impact what could have happened to Ophelia, that kind of thing. And I just don't know if I actually like brought that back around, so I wanted to mention it. Okay, well, I don't know how I'm ever going to post this video on YouTube because I've been filming for quite literally like 5 hours. So I may have really screwed myself over with this one, but I had fun doing it and I needed some fun. Was able to somehow make this one video. Thank you for being here and listening to me drown on about one of my favorite things in the world. And hopefully we can look back at this and either way it'll be entertaining because either I figured out some things or it's going to be very comical. See you when we do the reaction to The Life of a Showgirl. Bye.